Chapter 1185. Yu Ting, who had been looking inside with anticipation, suddenly changed his expression, revealing a look of incomparable astonishment. His face was full of disbelief. "Lord Yu Ting, what's wrong?" Vesani asked doubtfully from a short distance away. Yu Ting shook his head. "It's strange, very strange." "Strange?" Vesani didn't understand what Yu Ting meant. Yu Ting pressed his right hand down. "You'll know the answer soon enough." As soon as Yu Ting finished speaking, the Colosseum shook violently. A formless shockwave surged out from within, sweeping through the minds of all the Protoss present. The mortals didn't know what was happening, but the Protoss felt it very clearly. Vesani was the first to cry out. "An elemental creature? How can there be such a powerful elemental creature? This doesn't make sense. I've been to the Nilgard Highlands, the home of the wind elemental creatures. I've also been to the Fitten Abyss, the home of the fire elemental creatures. I've also been to the Aesli Swamp, the holy land of the earth elemental creatures." Just as he was lost in his pure elemental power, a sudden change occurred in the colossal God Emperor elemental creature. An inexplicable white fog God race member who wasn't very tall couldn't help but shout out. Before anyone could even scream at him, their entire bodies were shrouded in the thick fog. Perhaps this god wasn't as strong as Yu Ting. It seemed like Mission 8 was wandering god in the endless realm. Why wasn't there any notification? He never stayed in one place, always wandering. Even I can't see a thing. His dream was to travel to every corner of the endless realm with his eyes. Of course, according to his own words, more than a meter. This was a dream that could not be fulfilled. But when he spread out his mental power, it was also blocked by the creature. It was impossible for the others to. Could cover a maximum of several hundred meters. Isn't the biggest difference between his mind creatures and us? It was as if their divinity was his naked eye, can never reach even more vividly than the naked eye. Vesani asked. But at this time, in this thick fog, he could not even reach a distance of 5 meters. The endless realm of the gods is. Furthermore, he could not see even the overgods don't dare say they know all of its secrets. It was as if he was in the clouds and fog. It's not impossible looking at a small piece of elemental creature to appear. We just don't know about it. I can't see anything. What's more, we're facing a situation that even the origin will of the divine realm is very concerned about. The conversation He's our greatest enemy in this game, as well as our ultimate test. He understood that he couldn't see, and the celestial race wasn't any better. But I think it's only natural. He heaved a sigh of relief. Ordinary players could not understand what the Protoss were saying. If the celestial race was finished, chapter 11 celestial language that only the gods could understand. Heavy armor, but everyone knew that peasants' unimaginable must have happened inside. She must have found this moment based on everyone's attention was focused on man chapter 11. He remembered wasn't the actual However, he was trying to ask her question. Suddenly, couldn't help notification. The game responded inexplicably. During this period of time, the health commission had collected 10 kilograms of clay, but no one told her how bad the two men she had to consume not as soon as her house finished. The hellfire, though she had held tens of thousands of confusion, not knowing it was not enough for her expenses. Did this mean even if she could use that day and slow down? He seemed to be asking Qingguang, but also trying to transfer Qingguang to what was the lab. Did you see to a high spinning lantern for about 3 small man how she would be cultivated the dark north. Chen bent down and fired up the eyelids of Qingguang control what appeared to come. She was bewildered, she couldn't speak, and he was walling from the ground and reached Qingguang figuring out from below. He was dealers in the seconds certain hellfires around. Every reason why he couldn't see. They also did not know what the character version of the modern world had displayed. They were slaughtering this was supposed to be protected privacy. They could only know last for the other target move. The passageway was the same time they were also had encountered. Looking if he wasn't wrong, not long after Qingguang did strong Qingguang countered the original stomping goddess crowd. Then more and more than 5 warriors had perished in the labyrinth. Felt as though the eyes it's not necessary. He walked into the bottom of the wall and players. I don't believe the wall felt cold killing besides the small man. They no longer had the power they had. Qingguang had instead they looked like a pile of stubbornness was punching the wall up. He decided to fight a loud bang. I've collected all the things suddenly changed his mind. Qingguang was everyone had attacked her. Unusual traveling with Qingguang. Then the miniature version of the old driver player. She was alone. Instead, died. However, from the first right hand, you said she has the god level. It was exactly the same size as the real one. It made the walls more than though she didn't receive a clear. If he wasn't stopped, forget it. All of the walls climbed up. Only a few would got the Qingguang should carry a labyrinth. No, it wasn't just. It seemed like a simple suggestion. The hellfire stage lost its ability to rise to the Qingguang and strong was another new illusion like the divine chaos. However, at the same time, she felt ashamed. Although Qingguang's response rose all the hellfire clearly target had afflicted in her heart. Qingguang was however happy nothing to do. However, although he hated May's less and strange, why was there no choice to accept his fate? Although those others had no choice but to fight, I didn't want to ask at the same time. They looked at his just leg and envious of good things right hand hellfire to reach his labyrinth. He suddenly heard a crack and dodged wrongly while like chase pile drive. Thank you, Dang. His gaze never left the side of her heart, and she felt was it hellfire. She felt the tension she collected. How did you know? He turned and got she realized he was able to leave. It looked like he was on the other side of the labyrinth. How was Mr. Dang where he laughed as a cameraman, no matter how far terrible not being a peasant was overseas to notice not only Wang but was himself will always be the same. He ran joined his meal. My color was Qingguang making the front side left. I also received, however, counted on walls to the side, but that would know what do we do? It was just very down in his body. The old man was no trouble going but they didn't find. I stepped on a mechanism when I lifted my leg phase of mechanism. There was a new electronic notification. I was still so setting on this loud mission was illegible. Qingguang had held excuses. He temporarily stopped the earthworm's exploders natural ability. He held how strong was already lost his ability to resist. Peasant noticed Qingguang's shoulders ran. He turned around. Qingguang turned around. It's a long stone blob of standing behind him that was changing. Gods were caught up. It was only 3 seconds stronger when exact replica steps the weaker ones were in for a long. Indeed, not Qingguang they screamed in pain. His senses were such a long body, just a moment he should have been able to kill. What kind of white robe rushed out of the Qingguang's flicker used all kinds of illustrations, whitening magic. If it were someone else, they would run away. When the gods wasted their time on these Qingguang was very his natural ability. He wasn't involved at all. Such a strong jumping to admit defeat. However, he wasn't in a hurry to get closer, but the others had just surrounded him and stronger. Followed the black and white demons felt that there was something around his motive was obvious. The dark he had lost until he touched him. Suddenly jumped big seconds. He realized moment 2 figures Qingguang as his mobility became best. At the same time, he felt his body become brighter. After a while, the electronic Qingguang sounded on. It was the special effect. Gamer failed to lay. Qingguang must have been killed. 2 figures, one unfortunately he had to be in the air. Otherwise, long robes gold gods are overestimated. Qingguang touched your ass. You guys should just all 2 figures did you have legs? I'm not playing of their rows, cheating me. Apart from that, they were also familiar pointed hats, but there was no time under the center of the college. Chapter 11, hundreds of hellfires were if he was judged to know he was own golems, he wouldn't have nothing inside the round. However, realized that they were so good black and white, even so, when the god weird black and white, of course, he was very stones would instantly control back each stone contact with danger. There was even a relatively sized that was on the trees like shape, because now he saw no rage of Chinese. He was surrounded by numerous hellfire peasants that cultivation came to behind most of the settings. However, the wood he was on his position to blame is that how both sides were in chapter 11. All of this was tied to the beginning when Dang sinking to it had just been more gods were also world solid one traditional culture. When the seventh mission unfortunately Qin Huang thought that it might influence charged over, otherwise they had it all. Finally, with seeing Qin Huang all this stone golem carrying like peasants ridded his teeth in the endlessly cloud of the grim, he took out the western mythology. Then it quickly turned. After all, I am dissipated, though the clone had the same physical strength as gradual strength. She wasn't as floated out of time staring wearing a rock like when just as the clone myself controlled times the sound of a waterfall came from a place where able to press the button to strengthen my ability. Forgot about his what kind of awakening ability did you give me? Fortunately, he realized awakening ability could be turned into combat. He immediately used the extra elemental energy to form this only its head and arm. It looked a bit silly, but it was also had a single leg that resembled the whirlpool. You ting ladle when Qin Huang saw scamming myself. This is your last chance. How many reward there's a transforming into a whirlpool? I could only stare at the hundreds and thousands of items. It took a long time. It only took 2 seconds. If it wasn't extremely after decelerating, this guy wouldn't have been bothered by peasant dodged and minds heavy for so long. She could only logical transform. I don't understand what could do a wave that charged. It doesn't matter if you understand it or not. Although it was quite expensive, as long as everyone knows the wave continued to charge. I should have been able to. As the wave came closer, peasant couldn't avoid it. Chapter 11. This critical moment, after Qin Huang was projected the other blood-colored vortex fiercely blocking the attack long after it surrounded Qin Huang. He gradually felt strong the advantage of the rules as if it wanted to tear his body apart. Mud counters water. From the beginning, they only used the rules to force the infernal covered in gold sweat and flesh on her body. They didn't take the gradually to force the became more and more violent. He didn't have time when they saw that the situation was strange vibration. They tried to steal the Qin's controlled. However, they were dead by Qin. The maximum control time, they didn't even get himself to death for seconds. Instead, he crushed his teeth enough focused. They tried to lure Qin, but the infernal fire was the real Colosseum was to use time to delay the collide. Either these stoned people lost Huang was controlled lay not as long as 4 seconds, or they got the restraining effect several words if he was a piece of tattered clothes thrown into a wash. When they realized that they couldn't, as time passed, they spent their attention washing the street became more was also the moment when the However, was already too body became right. The rest of the hellfires there was no way to dodge, so he took at the hands of the ordinary. At first, Qin Huang only remaining dozen so were surrounded, almost scraping ordinary flesh. But after about 10 seconds, at this time, when they realized that Mr. Newton wasn't in a bad situation and had another way to suppress the infernal, though he was the ordinary players were covered in smoke and didn't suffer. They cooperated with each other to kill the monster. At this time, he didn't look special at all to another level. He didn't even have the original temperament. As soon as Qin Huang finished, they could either steal all the internal energy time halfway had expired, or they could only watch the last pest. The tearing force projected by the blood-colored vortex considering all danger of being surrounded by decided to let the drops of sweat gradually appear. They didn't want to touch the inferno, so she could only count on killing the ordinary players. But the strange thing was that even if he felt that his body was about to be torn apart, however, real reality transformed other considerations like the game float. It was obvious at this time Qin Huang was also long-range attacks. In his mind, his body color was changed. They would have learned to deal with change. Every time he punched, he changed his mind and decided to settle the score like a shot questioning heaven. The lost delusion of breaking space would be immeasurable soil that appeared. It was obvious that all the advanced parties, Qin Huang under the drive of true martial divine first mission was just all of them one by one. Unfortunately, he had only got problems in dealing with himself once again that time. Square one. Only a great to have his best to help the advanced, but he more than 100,000 years in the realm of true martial clones had thoroughly mastered characteristics of this mysterious mission world and had figured out so-called game that was not just cultivated to the martial stage realm that was a multitasking to do this. Now there was a limit to a person's health points above the foundation. They had so many skills for a long time. As a result, Wang's brain, for example, when a gamer was fighting with another, each of these techniques had the Protoss had even received a critical stabilizing one's health. Although the normal players were struggling to survive, the game was hidden. They were more proactive and managed to steal layers of similar skills were stacked on top of each other. The limits of the brain's operation were greatly developed. Otherwise, it allowed him to use more than 20 different skills in his mind. Fortunately, Clone didn't have the negligent ability of the Earth. It was like when a person took point the power of his punches was his mind by half stone golem couldn't cause any substantial damage to the gamers clarity as long as the clone prevented the extreme to the damaging peasant. It could even be said that a person's personality was about 20 seconds. The transformed elf sound in Wong was in such a state. The sound of winning after Wong was a series of material and transformed elf completely calm. This the gamers counted their reward. He didn't know if he was prepared a perimeter wall, although there were many things going on in his mind at the time more generous than they had imagined. It was as high as 10,000 points if his mind was completely by the time of what's more, the elven magical archer who killed more than 70 struggled with the spiritual body as the foundation. Though the other gamers had but now he actually had the magical more than was out of his body. However, when they accidentally looked at the man who had changed the magical beast causing his turn into an external vision, it was as easy as walking a dog. Very mysterious. 2 minutes later, it was as if his soul finally shattered. They didn't know what it was as if nothing had happened. But before he could feel his only in a trance, golems vaguely looking at himself from outside his body beside him. But it was as the unlucky transformed elf summoned another looking like an old man. Suddenly his jaw trembled slightly. My reward had seemed that after attacking him for a long time, however, he didn't want to take him down. Wasn't as mobile as the blood red was actually quite reward points to activate the additional amount of inner reward points that I already owed a huge amount of down one step further because the reward another kind of power in my purchasing power, which was the immediately gave me a dazzling list of items. She had not only used up all sweat that was stuck, she thought she could see the light after a while. What an awakening started to work on his body. 10 million for a moment, just like that. Take it anymore. How much was he? Let me think of another way. Fortunately, the Hellfire invited his aspirations from my forehead, and then he didn't expect the first, so I didn't need to use my chaos to be so distant and wait for death. Nor did I need to continue to stall the clones. He rather strange. Otherwise, previously he had tried to use the innate ability of the monocycle floaters to see if he could directly absorb the water element demeanor of an with another thought. But looking at the gamers, the clone was a mirror of their ability, so the elemental energy was unstable. Suddenly, he had to rely on the transformed elf's ability. If someone else was to took out the ability, he noticed that the surface when it seemed like they had absorbed all the elemental energy and collapsed and retreated. In just a few seconds, the elemental center of his eyebrows and the genius high to the other, his body gradually became transparent. He could only like the water in a cup that was suddenly God knows how they came up. His body didn't have any reward transparent. I didn't know how strong their armor was, but it looked quite scary. Qingguang looked at called the legendary petrified washing machine. And wasn't petrified. Searching in short shop, this was a strange and magical single soul. These are different from creatures petrification. Like the Hades, however, Qingguang could also have a mystical power. He's more formidable when it comes to the house peasant was overjoyed. It's a complete verification. No one could leave out any cost 2,000 reward points. His entire body with the description says magic. If someone picked it up, combined it, let me try the water dispenser armor had the anti-gravity jet person would probably be happy that they had washing machine chest would look like two human absorb energy. The only flaw was that he was not dressed in a series of music was not wearing an exquisite piece of equipment. In addition to the fireball magician was used, the other two were still only berserkers who tearing force and blood red vortex. It was imbued in order to exchange for real-time combat power. Next mission how can his natural they simply spent all those reward points? Was this item only the magician was not too far away from the 3rd my hand and there was a great possibility that he would get to trick test the 1,000 reward points after the inside. Two groups of players who had punched as their ultimate chaos were still obviously divided. The moment equipment came into contact with the clone according to the division. One side were the more stout and on the other side he had already changed and Qingguang retracted his fist. His left hand still holding on the chest of many of the Protoss members. The right hand dissipating without Yu-Ting's refined replica of the other Protoss members. Was the legendary wrath of the wasn't enough. If they were not careful with the rejections, Misha was no longer on the other side. The more the elf had replaced by a magic storm factor that was inside their backer, Mr. Dang, along their perish in the labyrinth of chaos, was the legendary wrath of the search close to their heads. There are, as for the original did Mr. Dang not collect a single trait? Did not seem to think Wilkins' magic hail and they seemed to lack someone to dispositions. What they did not know that it was better to use their reward points. If I hadn't traveled with him and allowed him retrieved after being shot, he would have been the first gamer to leave because of the Sonda coach. They could not practice Dang for it. There's no need to him. Since they were on the opposite side of Dang Noon from the beginning, I don't think you're that Sonda coach. It doesn't matter how there's magician masters could not so previously he didn't like Dang Noon's hands or when he realized that he hadn't used his darts for a long time. Dang Noon's skills hadn't deteriorated. Previously he had always disliked Dang later, but when he realized that he left hand loses the dart, no one knew what the headless dart drew in arcane. They did not have the Cosmic Passett, who was they were reluctant to give up the coincidentally she had suggested the floating wave like Dang many times. The elf knew that she didn't want to do so hard she had her side very fragile couldn't escape. After the dart hit his head, was willing to stand up and take the initiative to sacrifice their reward points momentarily because it meant that if they got more than 100,000 suicides and then swung to the boxing glove to awakening that was originally their peasant didn't need to awaken his ability to overcome the difficulty. In the absence of a person with enough that Mr. Dang is the elf nobody executed his combo attack. You better be successfully immobilized. The elf archer raised his eyebrows and abandoned and warrior self after his magical. This couldn't go on. There were basically no narrowing sprite as the card came in this slaughtering world. Qinguang suddenly had the idea of shooting more than half the internal strife eliminated from attacks warranted the current task. He was only a magician by people had now been reflect his real effects. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. As long as he wasn't stunned by the cons wouldn't be able to shake him off. The card magicians and the others chose to follow the sign. There's no notification of Mr. Dang Wu's death. Perhaps they were also taken by flattering sound to coach his enthusiasm. Perhaps to us the mission is on the surface, but to him the magic still ongoing. At this moment, here was the genius high school deserved to raise a different point of view. Now that their leader was didn't expect they were unwilling to join someone else's magic team. The reward for their magical beast was as they felt that the highest this time, whether it was cooperation or everyone comes, but peasant they had reached a very stable state. The reason was that given Guang others two types of fire, now they might even be used as cannon. Those who had distributed no one was made good use of the time. Was calculated there's only one contribution point. So even if the remainder of anyone else on the coach's team were suspicious of each other, Qinguang didn't have chose to maintain their small. He didn't know where his control situation. At this time, if peasant held on to the reward that others would ask, she would be able to purchase the reward from Chapter 1192. With their cooperation, Sherlock didn't have to worry about the transformed into a diamond Buddha statue. Her reward was maintained by Sherlock pretended to be deep. However, he himself, of course, his mind was not idle. There was until now, he knows what constantly trying to figure out the true body that allowed him to circulate his as the progress of the task. However, Qinguang had turned Qinguang also gradually understood the true meaning of the silent task flowed steadily. He wasn't bothered, but with a high efficiency, she wasn't his safety, maintaining the effects of Mr. Dang had discovered something. This was a very mysterious rummaging on the ground. Though he wasn't sure what was happening, it was likely that his world was legendary from a single-player to a legendary large-scale. At that time, he was very Mr. Dang, what do you think? Wasn't speculated that it was the target relation, which was also the real world and the real world. How did peasant rubbed his fingers during the course didn't conduct electricity, so how did Qinguang opened his eyes? He was puzzled no matter how space worlds has heavenly holy grail. After a long while, why he asked in the use looked extremely similar to Diamond. He felt that in addition, Diamond didn't conduct anything in his brain was still peasant real world and blankly. This meant she didn't cause wasn't other mortals to be dragged into the world how her senses nervous. It was precisely because of the emergence behind it. You can't see what I'm already in the world. The cup changed its original characteristics. Peasant raised his right hand after transforming into a diamond, extended it toward the end to evolve into a transparent game system that was richer in layers and different from the practiced dark so-called directive shop world was met with the strong points with various benefits. The masters of the transcendent touch or completing only didn't believe it, and they represented the core elements of the evolution of the past anyone else touching any. In addition, the peasant down system was to give the players the divine was as though they would drop could only close his eyes and felt they were face on end. This direct illustration was continued to provide stronger to the gamers during the mission going on. Diamond Buddha statue was also to understand why they were understand immovable. The ability to enhancement in the merchant shop I received in reality ability. This is one of the items we need to collect online games. It's a strange name perhaps because this was merely continued world in a complete development of large-scale online games. There was no end to the awakened ability to observe for a while and even if the most advanced was very discord technology could never see any difference. It wasn't like the traditional online games professions such as warriors and electrons, and even smaller bandit. This dark was a one-on-one reaction. No one could snatch. Perhaps it was based on the characteristics toward the real world. That was the awakened ability. There would always be a direct normal chemical reaction. Why did it drop? The random had to ability understood as well. Difficult to quantify. That should be the skill tree of the game. Forget it. Let's go. For example, if hydrogen and oxygen were mixed with water to carefree water, but it wasn't very produced a more stable substance that humans. The electrical appliance was within his strange ability to summon electrical water was already very stable structure of hydrogen and oxygen in common stages. Another example was after a while sniper rifle were even more ridiculous. A 3-meter was unreasonable to summon the apocalypse tank. When it became useless, it wasn't undoubtedly the strongest. Such a game developer would be said that there was no odds of real armor was strong. The hardness of the great strength and dream of the carbon skill tree of the however this was the world in the Qinguang wasn't able to. The only benefit was that he only perhaps it had no matter how similar so he didn't have to protect us in the boundless. There was a fundamental difference. For example, UT was too dropping away from developed by powers would naturally be different. Due to the high that was exactly what was happening at the moment. It was much more difficult for them to awaken their ability. He finally understood every tremble. However, once they accumulated enough reward coins would go a button to strengthen their ability, making his body even more terrifying. Using physical methods, the distribution of rewards for elemental power wasn't much different from normal. There were advantages and disadvantages to doing this. The rewards would be advantages were self-evident, but the disadvantages 70% of the players would receive the last slash. Obviously, other There was a difference in the way carbon-based creatures based on the contribution points of a single mission. One used bioelectricity. It wasn't difficult to understand brainwaves. Why was his awakened ability so ridiculous? Did not know what that was. Why did the celestial power of the celestials burst out of his experience it himself to know how powerful it was? What role did he have to play in this game mission? Vajrabuddha statue. Why did the celestial say that this game was related to the survival of the entire heavenly world? But his brain was not working very well. Why were they so hostile toward him from the start? His thinking had become rigid and completely out of control. Was his true faction the old celestials or the human faction? I was still feeling proud just now, but karma came more contribution points. Would it mean the victory of the human faction? It was such a simple sentence, but it took him at least a minute to think of it. If the celestials obtained more contribution points, anyway, I'll just pretend that I set a default program for myself. What harm would it bring to himself? At this time, as his thinking was solidified about these questions, it actually became more effortless. He was only sure that he did not need to deliberately urge the dozens of techniques that were running at the same time. His mind was like a computer automatically rendering blueprints, advancing the mental cultivation method control automatically. On the other hand, Qin Guang added another setting to his mind, and continued to strengthen the process of perfecting the Vajrabuddha statue. In short, he was going to go head-to-head with the world of slaughter. He would not resign himself to fate. After setting the default program, the thoughts in his mind completely stopped. It was a bit like he had fallen into a deep sleep, and also a bit like he was being hypnotized. In a muddle-headed state, his mind was in chaos, and everything around him began to become hazy. Moreover, as time passed, his thoughts became slower and slower, and his thoughts became more and more relaxed. He forgot about the blood-colored vortex above his head, forgot about the world of slaughter, and even forgot that he was currently under the direct obliteration of the world within a cup. The tearing force transmitted by the vortex became stronger and stronger. If this was the outside world, this kind of force could tear apart everything. Even the sturdiest concrete floor would be completely torn into powder or even annihilated. But there was a description written on the walls and floor of this maze of chaos: indestructible. Even if fragments fell due to a short period of shaking, these fragments would instantly dissipate into the most primitive form of energy, and then return to the walls or floor. The floor and high walls of the maze of chaos were nearly invincible, and there was a completely invincible energy cycle. At this time, the Vajrabuddha statue was surrounded by a dense fog. This fog was the powder that had been forcibly torn off the floor, but often before it could float past the head of the Vajrabuddha statue, it would quickly collapse, and then directly return to the ground in the form of energy. About 2 minutes later, deep pitch-black cracks appeared around the Vajra statue that Qin Guang had transformed into like a spider web. These cracks all disappeared in a flash, and the time they existed was extremely short, perhaps not even a femtosecond. It was impossible to see with the naked eye, but it made people feel that the light around Qin Guang had dimmed a bit. About another 2 minutes later, these cracks that should not have been seen with the naked eye gradually became clear. The reason was that after the small cracks came together, they fused in pairs, and even existed for a slightly longer time. If there was a crack that was lucky, then before it disappeared, another crack would luckily appear next to it, and after fusing again, it would exist for a longer time. These countless small and undetectable coincidences combined to form hair-thin cracks that were scattered around Qin Guang. After a while, these cracks became thicker and thicker, and in the end they were even as thick as a thumb. There was only endless darkness within the cracks, a bottomless darkness. This was space being torn apart, but Qin Guang's Vajra body still stood tall. When space was torn to the extreme, yet it could not break through the indestructible floor of the labyrinth of chaos, and at the same time, it could not destroy the Vajra statue Qin Guang standing in the middle. The tearing force further strengthened, and thus affected the flow of time. Time was endlessly accelerated, and thus affected Qin Guang's thinking. His originally extremely slow thinking suddenly returned to a normal speed. This was an extremely mysterious and indescribable state. Vaguely, he felt as if his mind was traveling to the ends of the world. His mind was chaotic and hazy, but he could see everything clearly. He felt as if he had fallen into a dream. This dream was boundless and incomparably vast. This feeling was even greater than when he had upgraded the heavenly Holy Grail from the first to the second level, and his mind had followed the power of the Holy Grail to roam the universe. But he could not see anything clearly. There was no galaxy in his mind, and he did not even have the concept of space and time. Suddenly, he seemed to hear the sound of something breaking. It sounded like a butterfly breaking out of a cocoon, or like a phoenix undergoing nirvana. After he completely let go of his thoughts, he suddenly turned his head and saw a tender sprout growing out of thin air in the void. It then soared into the sky and extended towards the boundless horizon. No, it could not be called the horizon. At this moment he did not have the concept of up and down, left and right, nor did he have the concept of time in the past, present, and future. After the sound of something breaking, it seemed as if millions of years had passed, but it also seemed as if it had only taken an instant to form this enormous plant in front of him. Suddenly, Qin Guang's consciousness trembled slightly. He lowered his head and looked down again. He actually saw an endless root system at the bottom of this plant. This root system was intertwined and spread out, and it was like a huge cloud that enveloped the bottomless abyss below. He actually saw an endless root system beneath the plant. The root system was intertwined and spread out, like a huge cloud that shrouded the bottomless abyss below. The thickness of this plant's root system and the area it spread out over was at least 10 times that of its upper body. It was so enormous that it could not be described with words. Qin Guang did not understand what this meant at all. He did not even know how his consciousness had entered this mysterious state. At this moment, the truly emotionless electronic notification of the heavenly Holy Grail suddenly rang in his heart. Congratulations, Redeemer. You have fulfilled the conditions. The heavenly Holy Grail is upgrading. Qin Guang was overjoyed. Although he did not know what conditions he had fulfilled, he had inexplicably upgraded the broken grail. This was a blessing in disguise. Just as he was happily thinking about it, a loud noise suddenly came from the void. A thud. It sounded like thunder but also like someone was stamping their feet. Upgrade complete. Redeemer is currently performing a mission. The next mission will be directly upgraded to the third layer, Cloud Elephant Sky. Redeemer's current mission environment is abnormal. Repairing, beep beep beep. This sound was a little like the sound of the motherboard self-test program when a computer was booted up. Then, Qin Guang thought he had heard wrongly. To his surprise, he heard a sharp and clear scream. Nothing happened after the scream, but the tearing force that had enveloped his body suddenly disappeared. The notification sounded again, but this time it was the slightly strange electronic notification that made him feel like it might have feelings. Congratulations, player. You have successfully resisted the obliteration. The Labyrinth of Chaos mission is completed. Reward points will be issued immediately. Qin Guang cursed in his mind at a super slow yet super fast speed. What kind of lousy mission system is this? There's such a godly operation? Forcefully resisting and successfully completing the mission. Chapter 1193. Also, who was the one screaming just now? What was that dong sound? Whose moral integrity had fallen to the ground? Forget it, it was not important. Since he had successfully resisted it, he could finally relax and slowly remove the petrified state. He did not dare to disperse his cultivation first. If it were not for the dozens of martial emperor secret arts that could stabilize the mind, he did not know whether his will could withstand the shock of turning into an immovable diamond. Who can tell me what's going on now? You ask me, but who should I ask? Didn't they say that the Labyrinth of Chaos mission is over? Why is the 9th mission not here yet? What do you think the 9th mission might be? Is it killing monsters or a labyrinth? Or something else? Forget it, don't guess. In any case, it definitely won't be as simple as the cockroach mission. This is the last stage. If we can pass it, we might be able to get out. The fat household appliance student said happily, this is really a special experience. From now on, I will no longer be the same person as before. The first thing I will do when I get back is to fire my boss. Ah. Damn fatty, you're a salesperson in an electrical appliance store outside, right? The genius high school student suddenly asked. The fatty was shocked. How did you know? The genius high school student snorted and then said, it's all written on your face. I'm just reminding you that it's best not to talk about the outside world here. Everyone here is smart. If you talk a little more, they might guess where you are and what you're doing. Even if we can leave this place soon, no one knows what will happen in the future. Rashly exposing your true identity is undoubtedly very dangerous. For example, who knows if we can keep our memories after we get out? Also, will everyone's reward points be snatched by others? Otherwise, in the face of the threat of life and death, what will you do if others ask you to obediently hand over the things you bought? When he said these words, he did not deliberately avoid the others. Instead, he deliberately raised his voice. When the others heard this, they did not express their opinion. Although they did not say the ugly words as clearly as he did, they actually thought so in their hearts. Oh, I understand. Then I can't even tell you? The fat household appliance student asked with his shoulders shrunk. The genius high school student smiled calmly. If you're willing to tell me, of course I'm willing to listen. Fatty always felt that this young man's expression was very sinister, but he could also be pretending to be sinister to scare people. Forget it, let's change the topic. What does it mean to be a teacher? Ask him yourself. Outside, the crowd who had been waiting for God knows how long could not help but whisper. Although no one had a watch on them, everyone had a simple concept of time. Unknowingly, several hours had passed, but there was still no movement. No one knew what was going on. Everyone was panicking, but they couldn't find an answer. Let's wait. We have no other choice. Peasant finally spoke. As the only person present who knew the inside story, she was actually the most knowledgeable. Others might not know if the mission had really failed that afternoon, but she had seen it with her own eyes and knew it clearly. If it was someone else, Peasant would have died. But Tang Wu was different. Peasant felt that Tang Wu wouldn't die so easily. Perhaps he could resist the rules of the game system. Perhaps he was doing that now. Otherwise, why was there no movement even after the Chaos Labyrinth mission had ended? On the other hand, after Qin Guang's mission was judged to be completed, he wasn't released immediately. After an hour, he was finally released from his petrified state and the state of absolute calmness. He stood up in bewilderment. He examined his body and surveyed his surroundings. He was still in the Chaos Labyrinth, but there were no side effects from the petrification. His movements were slightly inconvenient, but it was probably due to poor blood circulation after meditating for a long time. He would be fine after taking a few more steps. Hey, is there anyone here? Let me out after my mission is completed. He shouted at the top of his lungs, but no one answered him. Truth be told, Qin Guang wasn't really hoping for anyone to pay attention to him. It's just that he had vaguely heard a moment ago that made him suspicious. Hence, he purposely acted to see if he could trick the person who might or might not exist. But he didn't succeed and no one responded to him. After waiting for a long time, there were finally changes. First, the promised reward points arrived in his account. He heard a series of dang-dang sounds in his system. Qin Guang accessed his system and looked at it intently. He was convinced. He saw the number of his reward points jump at a rather strange speed. One moment, it rose by a few thousand points, and in the next moment, it was cleared out with a whoosh. Fine, it was the same old problem of missing out on everything. Unlucky Cup, what happened to the promised repair? You can't even repair a hole. Go back and fix the sewers. 100,000 reward points have been distributed. Please use them wisely. Qin Guang rolled his eyes. There was no need to be cautious. He didn't need to use them. Thank you. Wasn't it too shabby to only give 100,000 points? Previously, he had earned nearly 10 million points from Hades. Though he didn't get any blisters, it was better to have more points. Then, a gust of wind suddenly blew into his face from who knows where. He looked up and saw that the indestructible walls of the labyrinth of chaos were covered in fog. At the same time, they were rapidly disintegrating from top to bottom. Letting out a sigh in his heart, Qin Guang muttered to himself, Mission 9 is finally here? I wonder what kind of monster I have to fight. Just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly saw the fog that was originally soaring into the sky suddenly change direction and pounce straight towards his position. Wait, what the hell is this? Is it going to be a divine infusion? But isn't this the energy that formed the walls? Is it going to turn me into a cement man? Besides, shouldn't it be time to prepare for task 9? Isn't the labyrinth of chaos over? It would be fine if the walls just disappeared. Why is it coming at me? It was a pity that what was happening would not change because of his complaints. In the blink of an eye, he was completely wrapped up in the extremely thick white fog once again. Not only that, even though he had already shut his mouth and held his breath, he was still unable to stop the fog from entering his body through the capillaries on the surface of his body. In an instant, he felt that there was something different in his body. Seeing that the situation was not good, he used a ruthless move. He made the earthen yellow armor on the surface of his body continue to cover up, wrapping his entire body. Not only that, he also solidified the surface of the armor until it glowed with a metallic luster, making it completely airtight. In any case, he had practiced the embryonic breathing technique, so it was not a problem for him to not breathe for a long time. With regards to this kind of unknown power, Qin Guang felt that it was best not to come into contact with it. He had just become a diamond Buddha statue, and in the blink of an eye, he had become a stone statue. If this went on, he would have to change his name to a stone man. However, his resistance only lasted for perhaps less than 5 seconds. In the blink of an eye, the fog was like before, directly passing through space and appearing in his body. Seeing this, he also accepted his fate. Since he could not stop it, he could only say that he was ruthless. Qin Guang thought to himself, I can't be killed after completing the mission, right? Maybe this is an additional reward from the heavenly Holy Grail for repairing the slaughter world? That's good. If I think like this, everything is right. Life is like being forced. Since I can't resist, I'll just close my eyes and enjoy it. In any case, even if I open my eyes now, I can't see anything, only a vast expanse of whiteness in front of me. I'll probably be fine after a while? Maybe. Before completely losing consciousness, this was what Qin Guang thought to himself. At the same time, the people outside were also looking at the rapidly disappearing walls of the labyrinth. Everyone also let out a long sigh of relief. It was finally going to end. However, it was unknown who reacted first, but someone said loudly, "Did everyone notice? We didn't hear the notification that Mr. Dang was killed in battle." Everyone shuddered. But there was no notification that he completed the mission either. Then is he dead or not? What are you saying? Can you speak? Do you want Mr. Dang to die? I didn't mean that, I'm just curious. Come on. That's what you're thinking. I can see your complacent expression. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. What do you want? Do you think I'm afraid of you? After the MMA instructor died, the hale and hearty old man became a little more proactive. Seeing that the two of them were getting fiercer and fiercer, he suddenly stood up and yelled, all right, everyone stop talking. We're almost at task 9. If we don't unite, we'll really die here." The quarreling duo was startled awake and stopped using their divine powers. Peasant stood at the side and didn't say a word. She frowned, and her mind was replaying everything that had happened. She had a feeling that no one would believe her even if she told them about it. Though Mr. Dang said that he was an experienced gamer, Peasant felt that the entire game was against him. From the beginning of the mission, to the side missions that were forcefully assigned to him like a thief, to the unfair treatment he received in the labyrinth, there was an inexplicable sense of strangeness. All the signs showed that the gamers and Mr. Dang weren't playing the same game. Just like now, although the process was incomparably ridiculous, his mission was indeed a complete failure. But he didn't die. Even though the labyrinth was collapsing, he didn't die. Something beyond the gamer's understanding must have happened. Forget it, he should be out soon. Let's see if we can ask him directly. Peasant recalled the encounter in Mission 8 and felt ashamed and worried. He felt that he had tricked Mr. Dang badly in the labyrinth, so Dang wouldn't bother with him. If it were Peasant, he would have the intention to kill. Lord Yuting, should we charge in and take a look? If Dang Jing isn't in a good situation, we can. In the celestial camp, Weatheny lowered her voice and used her divine power to shield herself as she spoke carefully. Yu Ting was tempted, but he shook his head and said, "No, let's observe the situation first. Dang Jing won't die so easily. If he isn't in a good situation, it'll be dangerous for us to act rashly." When they were dealing with the Hades fire, the Celestials had suffered greatly because they underestimated their enemy. They thought they could kill Dang Jing, but they didn't expect Dang Jing to counterattack. This seemed to be an opportunity, but who knew if Dang Jing would turn misfortune into a blessing? Deep in Yu Ting's heart, he didn't want to admit another thing. He knew that the projected Celestials were going to deal with Dang Jing, but Dang Jing saved the lives of the Celestials during the Mosquito mission. It was unimaginable that she would feel gratitude towards him. He couldn't tell his subordinates the truth, so he had to find a reasonable excuse. Fortunately, he had sufficient prestige among the Celestials, so nobody doubted his decision. After a long time, Qin Guang opened his eyes slowly. He was surprised to find that he had grown taller. It wasn't just a little taller. It was at least 10 times his original height. He scratched his head out of habit, wondering if the wall of the labyrinth of chaos had increased in size after he merged with it. As soon as he scratched, he realized that something was wrong. His hand couldn't reach his head. Damn, did my hand become shorter? He tried to lift his hand and then he let out a goo in shock. That's right, it was a goo. Damn, I've become a monster. Looking at the palm in front of him, Qin Guang didn't even have the mood to complain. How was this a hand? It was clearly a wing. F***ck. That was what he thought, but what came out of his mouth was a goo. At that moment, Qin Guang suddenly discovered that there were 2 groups of people standing a few dozen meters in front of him. One was a group of ordinary players, and the other was the Celestials led by Yu Ting. With a grunt from his mouth, the 2 groups of people retreated one after another. Hey, what's going on with you guys? Qin Guang wanted to ask the others, but all that came out of his mouth was a series of goo-s. Then the 2 groups were shocked and immediately retreated further and further away, looking as if they wanted to keep a respectful distance. Forget it, so be it. Qin Guang was also annoyed. He turned around and planned to find a corner to crouch by himself. At the same time he checked his other skill, the legendary strongest language master in history. Then he quickly gave up. Alright, although I'm proficient in close to 5,000 languages on Earth, I haven't learned the real bird language. Alright, if it was on Earth with the old man's social skills, it wouldn't be impossible to chat with animals. Although I can't completely read the minds of animals, with my rich social experience I can guess most of it. But I really haven't learned how to speak to humans after I become a bird. Alright, I can use my feet. Alright, use my claws to write. Chen Guang turned around and faced the two groups of players who were ready for battle. He raised his claws and the two groups retreated dozens of meters. Chen Guang grinned proudly. It should be split beak. You idiots, what are you afraid of? I won't eat you. He wasn't too worried. He was about to start the 9th mission. After clearing the mission he would be a good man again, and it wouldn't affect his body in the outside world. Then he planned to use his claws to write on the ground of the ancient Roman Colosseum. At this moment, the mission notification suddenly rang in everyone's mind. All players, attention, the 9th mission will officially start in 3 minutes. Mission description: kill the blood pigeon. The reward will be distributed according to the damage contribution of all players. Special reminder, after the 9th mission is completed, the mission will be cleared, and the final settlement will be entered. Special reminder to all players, please hurry up and improve your strength. The blood pigeon is very strong, do not be careless. Chen Guang thought to himself, what kind of unlucky big boss is this? It's actually being targeted by the game system. There's even such a thoughtful reminder. It's clearly telling everyone not to save up, quickly become stronger, and use all of your abilities to kill the blood pigeon. Haha, if I were that blood pigeon I would definitely be cursing. Chen Guang took a deep breath. Although he didn't have any reward points to use, after absorbing the hellfire for a period of time, coupled with his huge body that was dozens of meters tall, his combat strength was definitely not just for show. When that blood pigeon came out he would pounce on it and kill it and then be done with it. Wait. He raised his right hand and swallowed his saliva. F***ck Uncle Lee. Goo 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 goo. F***ck I'm that blood pigeon? In other words, if I forcefully removed the erase setting, it would be the same as dodging the player's mission. Then with the Holy Grail's correction, this killing mission would be completely my own. So the player's mission was to kill the blood pigeon. The old man's mission was to eat all the players to death? Does that mean that I was wholeheartedly nurturing the human race players, but I was actually nurturing my enemies? When I saved Yu Ting and the other Protoss, I was also saving my final enemy. Fix your sister, fix it. I might as well not fix it. Chapter 1194. I don't have much time left. Chen Guang muttered to himself. Then he discovered that the gazes of the two groups of mortals changed after the mission notification was given. The mortals panicked for a short while. Many of them extended their necks in bewilderment and looked around as though they were searching for something. Chen Guang knew that they were looking for him. There was no news of his death, so they hoped that he was still alive. It was a pity that their plans were in vain. He was standing in front of them, but they couldn't recognize him. As for the divine race, there were less than 20 of them left. Those who were able to survive until now weren't ordinary. They were the elites of the divine world and the experts of the experts. 5 short seconds later, the gods all came up with an idea. They either bought items or clenched their teeth and pressed the strengthening button. Then their bodies glowed with light and their auras rose. Peasant realized that he couldn't find Mr. Dang. He turned his head and shouted, "Everyone be alert. This is the last mission. Since there's no news of Mr. Dang's death, he must be alive. Even if he can't help us due to certain reasons, we're much stronger than before. We have to learn to rely on ourselves." "That's right, it's time to show our true abilities," the genius student said as he stood up and shouted to the crowd. The genius middle school student said as he stood up and said loudly to the crowd, "Everyone who has completed the third awakening, if you are interested in trying my methods, you can come over here. I can help you strengthen your abilities, but the numbers are limited. First come, first serve." The genius youth was finally willing to reveal his abilities. Although everyone had already guessed it, it was still too unbelievable. "Really?" The card magician came up to him and asked happily. "Oh, I forgot to mention that besides the few of you, the rest can try." "What do you mean?" The card magician was unhappy. The young genius glanced at him and said, "Nothing much. I don't like you, so I'm unhappy. It's that simple." The magician was furious, but he didn't have a chance to protest. The hale and hearty old man, Fireball Magician, and the others gathered around. The old man looked at him with a serious face. Time is tight. Let's not dawdle and hurry up. The fireball mage, on the other hand, asked, Little brother, how many people can you use your ability? Sorry to trouble you. The young genius stretched out 5 fingers. 5, but I have to say this up front. When I'm adjusting your awakened abilities, you must have complete trust in me. Also, I can't guarantee that the effects will be positive after using it. Just like a brother in my team who was tricked by me. That's why he didn't live until now. I can't do anything about it. Are you kidding me? You can't guarantee the effect and you still want others to trust you wholeheartedly. Forget it, I can't do it anyway. Just pretend I didn't say anything. The card magician cursed and turned to leave. Seeing this, the young genius shrugged indifferently. See, I knew it would be like this. God knows how lucky these people are to be able to survive until now. Alright, let's start now. The young man clapped his hands and urged. The rest of them looked at each other for a while. The hale and hearty elder stood out and said, Let me try first. The rest didn't argue with him. Not everyone was willing to expose their abilities to others. Besides, they knew that with their suspicious nature, it was hard for them to trust others. The process wasn't complicated. The young genius tapped the elder's forehead. After a few seconds he released his finger. The elder didn't say anything. He turned his head and sat down at the side. Someone asked the elder how the situation was, but he smiled and didn't say anything. He didn't say anything good or bad. While the rest were hesitating, Peasant gritted her teeth and walked forward. Let me do it. The young genius' eyes lit up. Compared to the rest, I'm more curious to know what changes will happen to Miss Peasant's ability. I know you can control time. There was an uproar. In many novels, the ability to control time was the highest level ability. In Xuanhua novels, the rule of time was higher than the rule of space. How did you know? The elf magician archer knocked an arrow and aimed at the young genius. The young genius shrugged nonchalantly and said, When I sprayed the mosquito repellent, I felt uncomfortable for a short while. Then I felt like I was pressed on the slow button. I can't explain the feeling, but I know it's real. I've been observing everyone. Besides Miss Peasant, the rest of them have displayed their abilities. Miss Peasant is holding an hourglass in her hand. Besides the ability to control time, what else can she do? I'm not a fool. Alright, stop talking. There's not much time left, Peasant interrupted them and urged them. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. The young genius did the same. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. The young genius did the same. On the other side, Qin Guang had already decided to make the first move. He tried to take a step forward in an attempt to kill his way to the Protoss. Just as he had this thought, he discovered that he couldn't move. It was as though he was stuck in cement. He was locked on by the massacre mission. Since he couldn't move, his attempt to communicate by writing was futile. Forget it, 3 minutes it is. They can't defy the heavens even if it's 3 minutes. Qin Guang thought worriedly as he looked at the two camps. He was in a dilemma. He didn't care about the gods as long as they were pecked to death. However, the mortals were a huge problem. The poker lads and the MMA instructor were jackals of the same tribe. It was fine if they were killed. F***CK. Go. Qin Guang cursed and rushed towards the Celestials. He had not thought of how to deal with the mortals yet, but killing the Celestials first was definitely not a bad idea. Out of habit he took a step forward. Then he prepared to take a horse stance and unleash a palm strike that could topple mountains and overturn seas. However, when he unleashed it, he realized that he had no palm, only chicken wings. No, it was pigeon wings. The huge wings of the pigeon suddenly spun along with his body, and when they flapped forward, they brought up a scarlet whirlwind. The visible red whirlwind carried a thick stench of blood as it swept towards the Celestials. He did not use the earth-shattering palm, but he did use the blood pigeon's innate ability, Sea of Blood. But at this time, the Shin clan was not to be trifled with. They remained calm in the face of danger. One by one they leaped up at an extremely fast speed. It was like the 8 immortals crossing the sea, each displaying their own remarkable abilities. At this moment, Qin Guang's massive body had slowed down his movements. Thus his first wing, which seemed to be powerful, missed. In the next moment, a bolt of lightning struck his head, charring a few feathers on his head. Raising his head, Qin Guang saw that the lightning came from the tip of Yu Ting's spear, which was hovering not too far away. At the same time, he fiercely lowered his head, only to see that the Colosseum floor under his feet had abruptly turned into a soft swamp. His 2 claws were continuously sinking into the soft swamp mud that was suffused with green light. The swamp extended from where he was standing all the way to where Wethany was. It was her dress that was playing tricks on him. Not only that, but this brief moment of entrapment immediately caused him to be enveloped by countless attacks. All sorts of dazzling and powerful attacks landed on his body. Some of them were light enough to scratch an itch, but some were like Yu Ting's lightning, causing seemingly minute but accumulating damage. For a moment, Qin Guang was at a disadvantage because he was not used to the blood pigeon's body. There was more bad news. The Celestials had taken the initiative. Logically, the mortals should just sit back and watch. However, because the quest notification clearly stated that the final quest reward would be calculated based on the amount of damage each person dealt, no one was willing to slack off. Everyone used their trump cards one after another. The old man and his companions hid in the Apocalypse tank, which had a few black and thick tubes attached to it. With the old man's command, the Apocalypse tank buzzed, and the 8 thick tubes lit up at the same time. In an instant, 2 depleted uranium supermagnetic storm bombs flew out. 2 light blue ion beams with a high-temperature burning effect shot out. 4 Gatling guns fired wildly at Qin Guang, and the heavy lead core bullets rained down on Qin Guang. As for the others, there were big fireballs, deadly flying daggers, King of Hearts, and so on. Peasant didn't charge forward personally. Instead, he stood beside the elven archer. No one knew what he was up to. The elven archer knocked an arrow, while Peasant held an hourglass in one hand and placed his fingertips on the tail of the elven archer's magic arrow. There was a swishing sound. The elven archer released her fingers, and the magic arrow that was in front of her seemed to traverse space and appear between the eyebrows of Qin Guang's blood pigeon body. After the mutation of his awakened abilities, Peasant was able to use time acceleration on the magic arrow of the elven archer. Qin Guang felt that he was about to cry. "I'm seeing a ghost. Do you have to be so ruthless? Why didn't I see you being so capable?" Chapter 1195. Qin Guang flicked his head and pecked away the magic arrows that were right in front of him. At the same time, he racked his brain to think of a way to change the situation. After discovering that he was the final boss, he was momentarily at a loss and fell into a rather awkward situation. These people were too aggressive. They were completely different from when he was still around as a nanny. Faced with the final quest, almost all the players seemed to be on steroids. After all, everyone was determined to clear Quest 9 and leave this godforsaken place happily. As for the rewards that they would receive after completing all the tests, and whether they could leave this place alive, it wasn't something that they cared about. The quest notification specifically mentioned that this blood pigeon was very powerful and terrifying. Therefore, they couldn't let their guard down. They had to give it their all from the very beginning. They couldn't afford to be careless. From the beginning, there were close to 100 people who entered the quest. Now, there were less than 50 people who survived. No one dared to be careless and seek their own death. Of course, there was nothing wrong with the player's attitude. However, Qin Guang, who had transformed into a blood pigeon, was suffering. His current situation was very similar to when he fought the final boss in World of Warcraft. The players had to use all of their abilities to attack the boss. His current state was very similar to when he was fighting in a dungeon. He had transformed into a boss that could only move according to the system's settings. He struggled and roared, waving his frightening weapons. However, the players could easily dodge his attacks if they followed the rules. As for the players, they dealt as much damage as they did in the game. Although there wasn't a clear division of classes, the way they displayed their abilities was very similar to that of an online game. However, this boss wasn't a brainless NPC that was completely controlled by a computer program. Instead, it was Qin Guang who had a brain of flesh and blood and could scold people. He couldn't even remember how many times he had cursed in that instant, but it was of no use. What was even more shameful was that in the players' hearts, this gigantic blood pigeon was the final boss. From the very beginning, everyone had treated him as an almost invincible existence, and they had used all their might to bombard him. Unfortunately, the real boss had suddenly changed into a completely unfamiliar body, and now he felt extremely uncomfortable. Of course, the body of a human was completely different from that of a bird. Qin Guang found it awkward to use the various invincible martial arts that he was familiar with. Furthermore, the swamp that Withany had conjured was quite disgusting. Although it did not seem to cause him any harm, it could trap his claws and render him unable to move. If he was still in human form, Qin Guang would probably be able to fly out with a light body technique. But now he was like a bloated pigeon. What was even more irritating was that his feet were completely soft, and there was not even a place for him to stand on. Apart from that, a powerful suction force came from beneath his feet, dragging him down. The attacks of the mortal players from afar were like a thunderstorm, never stopping for a moment. Chen Guang's feet were trapped, so he could only flap his wings to block the colorful attacks coming from all directions. Fortunately, even though it was not convenient for him to use the unique skills of the human race, the blood pigeon did have some special abilities. Even a simple flap of its wings could create a bloody whirlwind with a strong smell of blood. It could filter out most of the less powerful attacks in advance. Even the particle cannons from the Apocalypse tank were weakened when they passed through the crimson whirlwinds. The more substantial damage, like the cannonballs and bullets, were able to penetrate the whirlwinds and hit the huge body of the blood pigeon. Though sparks flew, they didn't cause any substantial damage to Chen Guang. The real threat was the mana arrows shot by the elven archers. After Peasant used time acceleration on the arrows, the powerful mana arrows became even more mysterious and difficult to capture. They flew at a frightening speed. It was as if the distance between them didn't exist. Thereafter, that delicate lady was ruthless and her arrows were all aimed at Chen Guang's vitals. They were aimed at his eyebrows, his eyes, and his neck. Chen Guang looked at the aggressive mana arrows and didn't dare to hit them. The attacks of the gods were also troubling him. Yu Ting's lightning bolts bombarded his body as though they weren't charging electricity. The rest of the gods threw fireballs, ice cubes, and even fruits. Of course, there were also a bunch of demons that bared their fangs and brandished their claws, shooting various unknown energies. Coincidentally, no one or the god race was interested in taking another step forward. Even those whose awakened abilities didn't allow for long-range attacks chose to spend their last bit of reward points to purchase consumables with long-range attacks from the merchant shop. The Tang sect's sky-blasting thunder, thunderbolt, and Zhuge repeating crossbows were used. Some crazy galactic enthusiasts even took out their laser guns and aimed them at Chen Guang. Biu. Chen Guang had seen these items in his merchant shop. He even saw the legendary force field shield, which was sold for 100,000 reward points. If he could exchange for it, it would be much easier. It was a pity that he could only dream about it. Yu Ting's lightning bolt struck his head again. Chen Guang was anxious. He couldn't let this continue. Otherwise, he would be killed by the combined attacks of the two factions. This was because he found that after he transformed into a blood pigeon, the invincible talent of the earth paste exploder had disappeared inexplicably. He wasn't sure if his blood pigeon avatar would be able to revert back to its original form when it was killed. It would be great if he could revert back to his original form, but if he were to die tragically in the boss state, it would be too miserable. He didn't dare to take the risk. At this moment he suddenly had an idea, and a rather strange memory came to his mind. It was a rather strange martial emperor's unique skill that he had learned in the realm of true martial. It was called Condor Fighting Technique. It came from a non-human martial emperor called the Condor Hero. At that time, Chen Guang complained that this character must have been derived from Elder Jinns, the Condor Heroes, by the Heavenly Holy Grail. There was nothing wrong with this, but it was very difficult for him to learn Brother Condor's moves in human form. He had put in a lot of effort and spent almost 5 times the time of learning other ultimate skills before he managed to master this bird-type martial emperor's ultimate skill. Unfortunately, he had never used it since then. Now was the time. Sure enough, as soon as he tried to circulate the inner strength in his body, the originally very uncomfortable and blocked meridians suddenly became accessible in all directions, and he could do as he pleased. Chen Guang didn't rush to use the unique skill. Instead, he recalled the process of learning the Condor Fighting Technique in his mind. Although his mind was sealed in the realm of true martial, he still had hundreds of thousands of years' worth of memories. Even if they were solidified in his mind, he had to recall them slowly like a computer reading data. As he recalled, he continued to resist the player's attacks. Finally, after about 10 minutes, he had completely recalled the entire Condor Fighting Technique in his mind. In order to achieve a foolproof effect, he even tried to hypnotize himself. To be precise, he used world-class acting skills. He instilled an extremely strong idea into his mind. Next, the old man was going to act as a bird. It only took about 2 seconds for him to fully immerse himself in the role. Immediately, the players who had been happily attacking him seemed to have sensed the sudden change in his aura, and they all sensed it. Is this bastard on steroids? Why do I feel that something is wrong? The soldier carrying the big sniper had already walked out of his apocalypse tank. His treasure had run out of energy. But their firepower didn't weaken, including the old man. At this time, all of them were wearing individual combat armor about 3 meters tall. Each of them looked like miniature Gundams. These Gundams each carried a new type of big sniper which was quite powerful and caused a lot of trouble for Chen Guang. On the other side, the fat household appliance also poked his head out of his super-large electric crane and said loudly, "The pigeon's eyes have changed. It's glowing red." The genius high school student sitting next to the fat household appliance frowned. At first he didn't say a word, but then he suddenly shouted, "Hurry up and leave." "What? I told you to hurry up and leave. Jump down from here. We can't stay here anymore." The fat household appliance didn't know what was going on. He subconsciously wanted to refuse the genius high school student's suggestion. In order to make this large crane, he had almost exhausted all of his energy. Now, every time he used it to throw the super-large sealed freezer at the pigeon, he had to burn a lot of reward points. This crane was his baby, the ultimate product that he could summon with his third awakening ability. How could he give it up just like that? But the genius high school student didn't give him a chance to think. Without saying a word, he grabbed his collar, opened the door, and jumped out of the control tower that was more than 30 meters tall. "Why is this happening?" the fat household appliance shouted in midair. "No reason, we're going to die if we don't leave." The genius high school student answered him concisely. On the other side, the shield warrior Asenath shouted to the beast tamer hunter, "Hurry up and let your gorilla use rapid charge on the pigeon." The beast tamer executed the order without thinking. The gorilla that had been standing beside him roared, then charged forward like a cannonball. It even slid across the swamp, then raised its arms and slammed them down at the swamp in front of the blood pigeon. When the gorilla swung its arms, bolts of lightning appeared on its fists. It was very similar to the skill of the Hill King in the Warcraft series, Thunderclap. The boss is about to enter the second stage. The Fireball Magician knew what was good for him, as expected of an experienced online player. The Protoss players also noticed the changes in the boss, but unlike the ordinary players, they were more confident. Yu Ting even secretly used God's language to communicate with the others. "Fight to the death, this is a good chance to snatch the quest completion points." Qin Guang's blood-red eyes suddenly lit up. At this moment, his mind was in a half-human, half-bird state. He muttered something, but actually he was complaining about Yu Ting's wishful thinking. "You're all corpses and you still want to snatch the quest completion points from me?" In the blink of an eye, the blood pigeon, which had a third of its body sunk into the swamp, suddenly spread its wings, but it didn't flap downwards. The next moment, the long blood-red feathers on its wings stood up. "It's going to use its ultimate skill," the genius high school student shouted. The fat electrical appliance worker didn't have time to think. He raised his hand and summoned a large pile of old electrical appliances, piling them in front of the two of them as cover. A moment later, a red light suddenly appeared behind the cover in front of the two of them, like the sun rising from the east. Under the horrified gazes of Yu Ting and the other Protoss players, the tens of thousands of feathers on the blood pigeon suddenly transformed into countless javelins that shot out from its wings. These long feather javelins were so densely packed that the Protoss players closest to it couldn't avoid them. That wasn't the end of it. Every feather exploded halfway through its flight, turning into even more feathers that rained down on the entire Colosseum. Qin Guang's ultimate skill from the Condor art of fighting was called Thousand Feathers Slash. The situation immediately reversed and all the players were in danger. The first to die on the spot was the gorilla in front of him that had tried to stun him. Sorry, but as a boss, the old man was completely immune to stun-type control skills. The gorilla was first turned into a sieve, then it fell to the ground. A tombstone even appeared on the ground. Wethany, who was a little further away, saw that the situation wasn't looking good. She immediately retreated into the swamp beneath her. She managed to completely hide in the ground before the rain of needles descended, but there were still many feathers chasing after her. She didn't know if she could survive that. The other Terran players further away were also in chaos. The fat electrical appliance worker's beloved tower crane was instantly destroyed by the rain of needles. The old man and his companions conjured a huge metal shield in their hands. They formed a shield formation to protect themselves before the rain of needles descended. The card magician and his companions were in a worse state. The inferior force field shield that they purchased didn't last more than 5 seconds before it shattered. They had to use all their means to protect themselves. They could be considered lucky in Qin Guang's benevolence. The number of feathers that fell to their side wasn't much. As long as they are not so selfish and willing to spend the reward points in their pockets, or the valuable high-priced life-saving props that they have exchanged before, they can barely survive. Peasant and the elf archer had it much easier. Peasant used his mutated time ability to form a semicircular shield in front of them. The archers, on the other hand, switched to explosive fire magic arrows, shooting at the feathers that had been slowed down in the time shield, burning them to ashes before they could even land. The ones who suffered the most were the weaker ordinary Protoss players who were relatively close to the blood pigeons. After the chaos, there was a moment of silence in the Colosseum. Peasant and the elf archer dodged the burning feathers that fell from the sky. They looked forward and were shocked. The previously lively Protoss players were now sprawled on the ground. 3 or 4 of them were completely dead, while 7 or 8 were struggling with great difficulty. As for Yu Ting, his face was covered in dirt as he ran around. Every time he passed by a Protoss player, he would exchange for an expensive healing pill and stuff it into their mouths, regardless of whether they were dead or alive. Wethany crawled out of the swamp, her face covered in blood. Her body was riddled with wounds and she looked like she had been ravaged. Seeing this, Yu Ting hurriedly returned and stuffed the healing medicine into her mouth. However, when she touched her body, her arm fell to the ground first. "Lord Yuting, I'm going to die," Vesany said in despair. Yu Ting frowned. "What are you talking about? It's only the loss of a projection. I won't let you die so easily." Yu Ting did not particularly care about the lives of the other Celestial players, but in the Celestial realm, Wethany was his vanguard general. Yu Ting did not want to lose his right-hand man so early on in this game quest that made him feel powerless. On the other side, the Protoss players who could still move suddenly retreated a few steps. Yu Ting turned around and saw the blood pigeon, whose wings were now bare, slowly walk out of the swamp pit that had solidified again. Behind the blood pigeon was a bloody aura. Chapter 1196. Even though the gamers were of different races, they could feel the anger of the pigeon. They didn't know if it was a herbivorous magical beast or a carnivorous magical beast, but they felt that the pigeon wanted to eat humans. The earth-shattering blood chi flickered with a dark red radiance and soared into the sky. It was as if it was going to completely envelop the blue sky. It had to be said that the spectators and stands of the Colosseum had been made into mosaics. It was quite crude, but the sky looked quite exquisite. It didn't look beautiful. Instead, it accentuated the terrifying smell of blood coming from the blood pigeon. The dignified divine King Yu Ting was stared at by the crimson eyes of the blood pigeon, but he didn't have the majesty he had in the godly realm. He felt his hair stand on end and his heart tremble involuntarily. This feeling was as oppressive as when he faced the majesty of the divine king in the godly realm. It might even be stronger. It was so strong that he couldn't resist it. Everyone retreat. The human gamers weren't righteous enough to help the gods. Peasant was the first to react. He shouted and retreated with the elf archer and the other 2 girls without looking back. The other gamers reacted quickly. The fat household appliance gamer conjured an electric scooter for the genius high school student to sit with him. With a whoosh, the scooter dashed to the edge of the Colosseum. The genius high school student couldn't help but complain, "An electric scooter is considered a household appliance? Of course, it's a 220-volt charger. Why can't it be considered a household appliance? That's F*King reasonable. I'm convinced." Naturally, Qin Guang, who had transformed into a bird, could hear the conversation between the 2 of them. He nearly laughed out loud and lost his cultivation. Gosh, the 2 of them are destroying my killing intent. On the other side, the old man and the others in the Gundam armor also quickly threw away the steel shields that were riddled with holes from the needles and feathers. They turned around and crawled to the ground. Then, wheels fell off their shoulders and they turned into motorcycles. Their motors roared as they charged forward to escape. Their movements were quite swift and fierce. As for the card magicians group, after being severely injured, 2 of them died on the spot. The other 3, including the magician, gritted their teeth and crawled to escape in panic. The 3 Warcraft players were slower. Although they did not suffer too much damage under the cover of Azanatha's shield and the magician's dragon breath, the beast tamer was traumatized by the loss of his beloved pet. If not for his 2 companions holding him back, he would have charged forward without a care in the world. However, they managed to react in time, summoning their own mounts and running away. As soon as the mounts of these 3 fellows appeared, Qin Guang almost failed again. "Damn it, you guys are veterans of the T7 set. Why don't you guys exchange for some reliable mounts?" 3 chocobos popped out from the crotch of the 3 men, squawked and scampered off. The scene was extremely comical and out of control. The human players were further away, so they were not heavily injured. They were able to escape quickly, but the Protoss were not so lucky. More than half of the Protoss were heavily injured, and their fates were unknown. Even though Yu Ting had fed them medicine, they would not recover in a short period of time. Yu Ting had not even finished feeding everyone their medicine. At that moment, most of his attention was on the dying Vesni in his arms. Even gods could be selfish. Yu Ting's choice was understandable. The blood pigeons behind him were getting more and more intimidating, and they were already charging towards him. Yu Ting had no time to hesitate. He gritted his teeth and made a decision. He could no longer care about the other Protoss. He carried Vesni's broken body and flew away, fleeing into the distance. The blood pigeon that Qin Guang had transformed into let out a squawk and gave chase. As a pigeon it could fly under normal circumstances. However, its wings were bare so it could not fly even if it wanted to. However, it wasn't slow at all. Rather than calling it a pigeon, its short legs swished as it ran as if it had eaten stride. It was as fast as a bolt of red lightning, chasing after Yu Ting and Wethany. Qin Guang, who had completely hypnotized himself into a blood pigeon, had both the intelligence of a human and the battle instincts of a phantom beast. Among all the players, Vesni's attack power was almost non-existent. However, her swamp special skill could cause the most trouble for Qin Guang. Kill the biggest threat first. This was the simplest battle philosophy of a high-level phantom beast, the blood pigeon. So, without hesitation, he chose to chase after Yu Ting and Vesni. As for the other players, he could deal with them later. However, Yu Ting was not to be trifled with. Now that he had control over lightning, he could run as fast as lightning. He held Vesni in one hand and held a spear in the other. Plasma sprouted from the bottom of the spear, and the plasma surged into the shape of a flying carpet, which he stepped on. While running, Yu Ting did not care about the cost. He bought healing items and stuffed them into Vesni's mouth, or sprayed her with a spray. Qin Guang chased after Yu Ting for a while, but not only was he unable to catch up to Yu Ting, even Vesni was slowly coming back to life. Her severed arm had regrown white bones, and with these bones as a foundation, flesh and blood were slowly growing back. The countless holes on her body were also healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing that Yu Ting had even put Wethany down, the annoying Lolita goddess was standing on the plasma carpet beneath Yu Ting. She even turned around and made a face at Qin Guang. Qin Guang decided not to chase after her. He immediately turned around and headed for the center of the Colosseum. There were still many Celestials lying there. Some of the Celestials had already crawled up and fled, but there were still some who were struggling to save themselves and had not yet recovered. As Qin Guang ran, he used the innate ability of the blood pigeon, a phantom boss. Although its regenerative ability was far inferior to that of the Earth Marmalade Exploder, it was easy for it to regrow its feathers. As he deliberately activated his talent, his wings, which were so bald that they could be roasted and eaten, first surged with red blood. As the light flickered, the red blood quickly covered his entire wing, and in the blink of an eye, it turned back into feathers. This time, the blood pigeon that Qin Guang had transformed into finally learned how to fly. It flapped its wings and soared into the sky. A strong gust of wind accompanied the blood pigeon's flight, and it brought pain to those who saw it. Just the wind caused by the flapping of its wings could cause damage. After Qin Guang had completely adapted to its body, the blood pigeon's strength was evident. Yu Ting, who was running away, saw that the situation was not good. He quickly turned around and shouted, "Run!" 2 or 3 of the Celestials on the ground struggled to get up when they heard this, and ran forward regardless of the consequences. Another 3 or 5 Celestials even struggled to save their companions, but most of the Celestials were still lying on the ground. They were either on the verge of death or had no strength to get up. After a short period of chaos, the blood pigeon that Qin Guang had transformed into had already flown above them. Then the blood pigeon opened its beak and like a machine gun, it spat out thumb-sized chunks of qi. Those who didn't know what was going on would think that it was science fiction, and Qin Guang himself felt very awkward. No one would believe it, but this move was also a unique skill in the condor fighting technique, called spitting grape seeds. That's right, this was the name. It was quite simple and crude. What he was spitting out now was a sharp cone of qi called grape seeds. If Qin Guang were to name it himself, he would probably rename it Bird Beak Gatling Gun. Obviously it was more fitting. As he released this ultimate move, the chunks of qi were like machine guns firing at the ground, and the Celestials on the ground were immediately hit hard. Those who could still move either tried to dodge or used the items they had exchanged from the shop to protect themselves, but it was of little use. After a round of intensive shooting, the blood pigeon glided back to the ground, leaving behind only a piece of farmland that looked like it had been plowed by 8 oxen repeatedly. After Yu Ting put down Wethany, he rushed to the spot, and his face turned ashen when he saw the tragic scene. Previously, several Protoss had already died in battle. After such a torment, there were less than 10 Protoss who survived. The blood pigeon was not in a hurry to launch its next attack. Instead, it turned around and opened its beak again. Yu Ting thought that it was going to spit something again and was shocked. He was about to turn around and run. But in the end, the blood pigeon did not spit anything. Instead, it took a deep breath in his direction. About 100 meters in front of Yu Ting, there seemed to be a black hole in the blood pigeon's beak. The strong suction made people feel like they were in the center of a tornado. Seeing that the situation was not good, Yu Ting quickly dodged to the side. In the process, he quickly picked up the remaining celestials on the ground and threw them far away. As for those who were already dead, he had no time to care about them. But he did not know that Qin Guang's real target was not the living celestials, but those who were already dead. Just now, he had planned to spit grape seeds again and plow the ground again, but suddenly, he faintly smelled a scent from the dead celestials that made his blood boil. It felt like a smoker who had failed to quit smoking and smelled smoke after 3 days, or like an old drunkard who suddenly had a large glass of pure Maotai wine in front of him. It was quite addictive. Therefore, he used a move from the condor fighting technique called swallowing mountains and rivers. As the name suggested, the key to swallowing mountains and rivers was to use internal energy as a driving force, using the well-developed lungs of birds as an air pump to crazily absorb the air from the outside world into one's body. Back then, Brother Condor had used this move to deal with the siege of nearly 1,000 martial artists. After using it, almost all the energy in the bodies of nearly 1,000 martial artists was sucked dry in a short period of time, causing them to completely lose the ability to resist. Right now, Qin Guang wanted to use this move to try and absorb the divine power released by the Protoss who were already dead and in the process of disintegrating into energy form. Of course, there was a side effect that was not very elegant. According to the law of conservation of matter, where there was an input, there must be an output. As for the method and place of the output, this was basically no different from when he was in his human form. Other than the mouth and nose, there was only one place on an animal's body that could still exhale. As a result, colorful smoke rose from nearly 10 places on the rapidly recovering Colosseum. Accompanied by the blood pigeon swallowing mountains and rivers, the smoke flew into its mouth. Under Yu Ting's extremely pained gaze, the divine power released by the celestials was all sucked into the blood pigeon's mouth. However, it was not absorbed by him. Instead, it turned into colorful light that rushed out from the back of the blood pigeon and completely integrated into the slaughtering world. Yu Ting could not help but feel sad. The dignified and respected gods in the endless god realm had actually suffered such a great humiliation in this stupid mission. Not only did they die, they actually had to be eaten by this magical beast and then burst out from the back. What is your intention in doing this? If it was not for the fact that the other party could only croak, Yu Ting really wanted to scold it. In fact, even Qin Guang himself did not know what the point of doing this was. He subconsciously felt that filtering the celestial's power out of his body would definitely be beneficial. However, when he carefully examined it, he felt that the benefits were completely undetectable. It was somewhat similar to the situation when they encountered the giant mosquito formation. The only difference was that in the giant mosquito formation, the giant mosquito first changed the nature of the celestial's power, then he did the filtering. Now he had become the mission boss, and the whole process was a one-stop service. Forget it. Since he could not figure it out, there was no need to continue dwelling on it. There was definitely no harm in doing this. Qin Guang turned his head and once again focused his attention on Yu Ting. At this time, the other surviving celestials had mostly recovered and gathered behind Yu Ting. Facing the blood pigeon's eyes that seemed to want to devour someone, Yu Ting and the other celestials slowly calmed down from their initial panic. Blindly running away would not change their fate. The power of this blood pigeon was just as the mission description said. It was so powerful that there was no room for carelessness. Both sides had only fought for 2 to 3 rounds, and half of the celestials had perished. Everyone, do you really want to wait until all of us are dead before showing your true power? Do you think you can take advantage of our deaths? It won't be that easy, right? Yu Ting said loudly without turning his head as he stared at the blood pigeon with all his attention. Everyone knew that he was talking to the mortal gamers. The mortal gamers looked at each other before focusing their gazes on the old geezer. At this critical moment, they believed that the older the ginger was, the spicier it was. They would let the older gamers make the decisions. The old geezer hesitated for a while before gritting his teeth and saying, "Let's not hide our abilities. If the celestials are all dead, we won't have a good time." Qin Guang was anxious. Chapter 1197. The result of the fruitless communication was that when there were less than 10 Protoss players left, the two camps finally joined forces. This was the situation that Qin Guang had been trying to create. He did not expect that it would finally happen. However, the one they were going to deal with was him. This was an awkward feeling. Qin Guang, who had turned into a blood pigeon, no longer wanted to complain about himself. Right now, he only wanted to destroy the Protoss as soon as possible. As for the human players, he would be merciful and allow them to be willful one more time. There was no other way. The old man was just that kind and generous. After filtering the divine power of the dead Protoss players, he immediately flapped his wings and flew into the sky, causing all the attacks from the human players to miss. At the same time, he put himself in an invincible position. Looking at the many opponents on the ground, Qin Guang felt a sense of accomplishment as a boss for the first time. Have you ever seen something like this before? The old man can fly. Are you afraid? While he was gloating, Yu Ting, who was on the ground, also leaped into the air. Qin Guang immediately remembered that Yu Ting could also transform into lightning and fly into the air. From the looks of it, Yu Ting was no longer a coward and wanted to fight him head-on. Qin Guang narrowed his pigeon eyes and looked down at Yu Ting, trying to guess his motives and what he was relying on. It was obvious that Yu Ting was no match for him. Where did he get the courage to fly into the air and attack him? He took a closer look. Sure enough, the remaining Protoss players, who were scattered in various corners of the Colosseum, had unknowingly formed a formation on the ground. Faint but eerie blue threads were connected to these Protoss players. Not only that, but as time passed, these originally single threads gradually grew more and more branches. These branches were connected together. In addition, there were nearly 10 Protoss at the center of the array. Gradually, the huge Colosseum was filled with an enchanting yet beautiful magic array. I've stalled him. Mortal friends, I have just used up all my reward points to purchase this magic array. This tool is called No Pigeons Under the Heavens. It can gather the power of everyone standing in the magic array. Please take the initiative to stand in the center of the hexagram. Only by gathering everyone's power will we be able to control it. Yu Ting, who was originally on the ground, roared. Lightning surged from his body once more, and he soared into the sky, charging towards Qin Guang. Qin Guang heard his words clearly and found it funny. He thought that he was really a fantasy beast and couldn't understand human language. Do you think I'll let you comfortably store your ultimate move? Do you take me for a fool? Also, do you think those human players will fall for your tricks? God knows what tricks you have up your sleeves. Perhaps the moment ordinary players step into this formation, they will be firmly controlled by you and become nutrients for your doomless formation. How could the old man's players be so stupid? Impossible. Holy sh*t, you guys are so honest. They didn't even bother to check and just stepped in like that? Since when did you guys become so simple and honest? Under Qin Guang's dumbfounded gaze, nearly 20 human players stepped into the eye of the magic array without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, the magic array that only covered the celestial players suddenly became even more dazzling. The mysterious patterns on the magic array continued to grow like spring buds. In less than 2 seconds, the colossal bestial battle arena was completely occupied by Yu Ting's No Pigeons Under the Heavens magic array. As for Qin Guang, who was flying in the air, he had originally planned to fly a little higher and use the ultimate move of condor fighting called 10,000 Eagles Greeting. He wanted to give Yu Ting and his unlucky magic array a vicious blow. Unexpectedly, as he was flying, he suddenly felt his wings tighten. A terrifying force came from below and fiercely pulled him down. He felt as if his wings were being grabbed by a giant. This force was so overbearing that he couldn't resist at all. Qin Guang's upward momentum immediately came to a halt. He turned around and fell headfirst to the ground. The name of this magic array was very strange, but it was so powerful that it made people's hair stand on end. As he fell, he tried to control his body with all his might, but it was all in vain. He couldn't move at all. As for Yu Ting, he continued to fly in his direction. Behind him, lightning flashed and thunder roared. It looked like a fireworks display. He can't move. Yu Ting seemed to be talking to himself, but it also seemed like he was telling someone else. His face lit up with a relieved smile. Qin Guang finally understood. In fact, this guy didn't know what the special effect of the No Doomless formation was. He just wanted to give it a try. It was just that he was unlucky enough to be the one to succeed. Forget it, I'll peck you to death. Although he couldn't move his wings, Qin Guang could still turn his head slightly. He extended his neck and aimed his beak at Yu Ting, who was rushing up from below. Unfortunately, Yu Ting wasn't stupid. Just as the two were about to make contact, he nimbly dodged Qin Guang's kiss of death. He turned and followed the giant body of the blood pigeon as he fell. Then, as he descended, he stabbed the lightning spear in his hand at the blood pigeon's huge back. Now that he had used up all his reward points, the only thing he could rely on was his divine power. Sparks flew from the blood pigeon's back. Its crimson feathers were burnt black for a moment, then returned to normal the next moment. Yu Ting couldn't help but curse inwardly. The magical beast in the last checkpoint was a little too powerful. He had already used all his strength, but he still couldn't break through its defense. As for the other players, they didn't stay idle either. Seeing that the giant creature was really controlled as Yu Ting said, they all used their trump cards and bombarded the stomach of the blood pigeon. With a loud bang, the blood pigeon's huge body fell to the ground, and then there was no sign of life. Of course, Qin Guang wouldn't die so easily. In fact, while falling from the sky, he seemed to have suffered serious injuries, but in fact they were only superficial wounds. He didn't move now because he was trying to figure out how to use the unlucky no doomless formation. Without batting an eyelid, he tried to kick his legs. The feeling of being completely restrained was gone. He could move freely again. As he had guessed, the no doomless formation was actually a magic formation that restricted the flight of birds. Once it landed on the ground, it would lose its effect. Dead? On the ground, a Protoss looked at Yu Ting and asked carefully. Yu Ting squinted and waved his hand. Everyone stay where you are. Otherwise, the formation's effect will be weakened. I'll go take a look. The effect of the no doomless formation was better than expected. Of course, the players wouldn't give up so easily. Moreover, since Yu Ting had taken the initiative to test the waters, the others were more than happy to see him. If the pigeon was faking it, they wouldn't be the ones to suffer. Yu Ting was on high alert. He approached the blood pigeon step by step. On the other side, Wethany once again summoned a swamp, spreading it along the ground in an attempt to suck the body of the blood pigeon into the swamp. Yu Ting moved closer, raised his lightning spear and stabbed it at the blood pigeon's head. With a swish, the spear cut through the blood pigeon's feathers. Although it didn't pierce through, it finally left a wound on its head. Yu Ting's eyebrows twitched slightly. It seemed that the formation he had exchanged for was really effective. He just didn't know if this kind of binding contribution could be counted into the final kill contribution. Yu Ting gradually became selfish. Like Qin Guang, he believed that there must be a reason why the massacre mission divided the gamers into the Mortals and Protoss factions. In addition, throughout the entire process of carrying out the mission, it seemed that Slaughter World had always emphasized one point, and that was either the damage contribution or the number of people killed. The distribution of rewards seemed to be specific to each gamer, but Yu Ting felt that there was another meaning. Yu Ting's lips trembled slightly, and the mana formation on the ground started to change slightly. The blue light on the magic vein patterns grew brighter and brighter, and gradually, everyone couldn't see the scene in front of them clearly. Yu Ting said loudly, "Don't panic, I'm strengthening the control of the mana formation. Once it's under control, it'll be ours to slaughter. Don't be stingy with your reward points. Completing the mission and surviving is more important than anything else." "Are we really that generous?" In the human camp, the female elf archer asked Peasant, who was standing not far from her. Peasant looked at the motionless blood pigeon in the distance and frowned. She thought for a while and said, "Besides Emperor Yu Ting, none of us can afford the mana formation. Since we have a chance to kill this boss, we should work together with them." The female elf archer nodded and said, "Indeed. Mr. Dang said that to overcome this crisis, we have to work together with the annoying Protoss. But don't be too generous. We have to have a backup plan." "All right, don't worry, Sister Peasant. I understand." Peasant had the same thought and the others had similar thoughts. Though they didn't know what happened to Dang Dang, even if he was gone, they wouldn't forget his instructions. The situation between the Protoss and the humans had reversed. The humans were getting stronger while there were less than 10 Protoss left. Everyone didn't fear the Protoss, so they didn't oppose working with them. It was like a rabbit being unwilling to work with a jackal. If the jackal became a piglet of the same size as the rabbit, there would be room for negotiation. Everyone had seen the world without pigeons formation in the reward point shop. The price was a few 100,000 points. Yu Ting wasn't bragging. He had spent all his reward points. Qin Guang, who was pretending to be dead on the ground, was in awe. He felt sorry for Yu Ting's misfortune and angry at Yu Ting's incompetence. Previously, when he wanted to ask these people to help save the divine race, they all resisted and objected in various ways. Yu Ting had selfish motives, but they let go of their grudges and worked with him. Should I really treat them as my own kind? Qin Guang asked himself. He wasn't in a hurry to act as he knew Yu Ting's plan. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, the halo around his body became more and more intense, as if it had really formed a large net to trap him. As for the players of the two factions, they couldn't see anything. The strong light was even worse than the white fog. The ordinary players started to panic, and Yu Ting once again reassured them. "I've got Blood Pigeon under control. I'll be able to focus the mana formation on him soon." The others couldn't see clearly, but Qin Guang wasn't in human form. He had transformed into a big boss bird. His eyes were completely different from a human's. Qin Guang narrowed his eyes. He watched as Yu Ting moved the Protoss closer to him with the mana formation. He could see through Blood Pigeon's intentions. First of all, this guy thought he was being controlled. Second, he planned to send all the Protoss over to steal the old man's head? Good. Without batting an eyelid, he began to inhale violently. Fortunately, he was lying on the ground with his back facing up. Under the cover of the strong light, even Yu Ting, who could see, didn't notice that Blood Pigeon's chest was expanding. Finally, about 3 minutes later, all the Protoss were silently teleported to a place not far from Shuang. Qin Guang could even hear Yu Ting whispering instructions to the others in God's language. They were formulating a battle plan to succeed in one fell swoop. At the same time, Vesni's swamp once again covered his body. This time more than half of it was buried in the swamp. Holding his breath, Qin Guang felt as if the aura in his chest was on the verge of exploding. He was both the prey and the hunter. Chapter 1198. Yu Ting led the celestial race to probe carefully. Qin Guang was also trying to suppress his urge. A little closer, a little closer. He squinted his eyes and allowed the wounds that Yu Ting had left on his body to gush out blood. He could have used the Blood Pigeon's talent to convert the blood that gushed out of the wounds into energy and reabsorbed it into his own body, but he did not do so. As a black-bellied young man of the new era, he wasn't one of those idiotic bosses in the game who only knew how to deal with players in a fixed way. He was strong, cunning, and good at acting. If the person controlling the world without Pigeon's formation was not Yu Ting, but another human player, they would not have fallen for it so easily. After all, humans were more careful in their actions, and they were also more knowledgeable about such things. However, Yu Ting did not think too much about it. He believed in his own divine power and the game's setting that was forced upon him. In his mind, this was a quest space created by the origin will of the endless realm of gods. This quest space must be perfect and flawless. When Yu Ting chose to purchase the magic circle, he had carefully read the description of the magic circle. It was clearly written that the magic circle could cause fatal damage to bird-type creatures and completely control them. Up until now, the effects of the magic circle had achieved its goal. Although it was expensive and consumed a lot of energy, as long as they could kill the Blood Pigeon, it was all worth it. As long as they could successfully complete this quest space, it would mean that their goal of leading the advance party into the game space had been achieved. Yu Ting turned to face the Blood Pigeon again and raised his hand. However, he immediately realized that no one could see his hand gesture, so he retracted it. Even as the controller of the magic circle, he could only see a faint shadow. However, he could sense that the entire magic circle's power was pressing down on the Blood Pigeon. Heavy breathing could be heard from the Blood Pigeon's direction. Yu Ting felt that the most powerful phantom beast was struggling with all its might. Everyone pay attention to my instructions. Although this phantom beast is strong, the defense of its neck and the back of its head is relatively weak. When I give the order, everyone will attack together and attack the back of its head. We will definitely be able to deal a heavy blow. Yu Ting lowered his voice and spoke in a voice that only the Protoss could hear. Although we may have to bear a certain amount of risk, if we can deal a heavy blow to the Blood Pigeon, it will definitely give us an advantage in the mission settlement. However, don't be greedy. Just hit it once and then immediately retreat. Let this phantom beast find trouble with those mortals. Yu Ting felt that his plan was flawless. Even if he couldn't succeed in one fell swoop, he could at least deal a heavy blow to the Blood Pigeon. If the Protoss were to retreat immediately, the human race would have to stand in the front instead of the back. Facing the attack of the Blood Pigeons, they had no choice but to change their stance of not contributing. Unfortunately, in order to get his voice through, Yu Ting could switch channels, but he couldn't block messages. Every word he said was clearly heard by Qin Guang, who was pretending to be dead on the ground. Since this little scheme of his was within Qin Guang's calculations from the very beginning, it was destined to fail. The mortals, who were completely in the dark, were unwilling to follow Yu Ting's orders. However, the magic circle that Yu Ting had exchanged for had a miraculous effect. Even if they felt that something was amiss, the mortal players still held the intention to wait and see. If it was really as Yu Ting said, that they could completely control the blood pigeon until it died, that would be for the best. Even if there were any problems, Yu Ting should be the first to get into trouble. Aren't we being too passive? The fat household appliance worker asked softly into the walkie-talkie hanging around his neck. The genius high school student replied, "So what if we're being passive? Can you afford to buy a magic circle? But this won't end here. This is the last boss. These Protoss have never played online games before, so they don't know that even the real big boss is not easy to deal with, let alone the final boss. According to my experience, this blood pigeon must have many forms. Don't forget, when it exploded its feathers, the Protoss suffered heavy losses. We didn't feel good either. Isn't this situation similar to before?" The fat household appliance worker thought about it and nodded. It was exactly as the high school student had said. Just as the two of them were conversing, Yu Ting, who was in front of them, shouted. In the next instant, the azure light that had covered the entire beast fighting coliseum quickly converged on Blood Pigeon, who was lying on the ground. Yu Ting activated the full power of the No Pigeon formation. The blood pigeon turned into a blue lump. It was as if it had been pressed to the ground, unable to move. Nearly 10 Protoss who were prepared shot into the sky at almost the same time. Perhaps they were using all of their divine power, or perhaps they were carrying expensive single-use items that they had just exchanged for. The power of these items might not be worth mentioning in front of their celestial bodies, but in this slaughtering world, they were definitely the strongest attacks they had seen so far. Just from the names of the items that they had exchanged for, they knew that they were not joking. Annihilation cannons, star destroyers, slaughter puppets. In short, the names of these items were extremely domineering. If they were in the celestial realm, the gods might have thought that these items were so childish that they were laughable. But now they no longer looked down on them. 70% of their companions' projections had died. Perhaps they would be next. Although he was a noble Protoss, in this mysterious mission space, other than having a slightly higher starting point at the very beginning, it seemed that his vitality was not much stronger than that of mortals. Therefore, they had to seize this hard-won opportunity and establish a real advantage for the advance party in the first test of this mysterious mission. With this thought in mind, all of the gods' attacks were aimed at the back of the blood pigeon's neck. On the other side, Yu Ting did not move. He only stared at the blood pigeon that was completely covered in blue light. Firstly, he really did not have any more reward points. Secondly, he had to control the magic formation. Finally, it was done. Seeing that everyone's attacks were aimed at the back of the blood pigeon's neck, Yu Ting thought to himself. At this moment, the huge body glowing with blue light suddenly raised its head. Yu Ting's pupils shrank. He opened his mouth wanting to shout out loud. But it was too late. The gigantic blood pigeon displayed unimaginable agility. When it raised its neck, it spread its wings and flapped them on the ground. Even though it had hit the swamp that Vithany had conjured, the large area of contact still provided it with enough strength to land a hit. The next moment, the blood pigeon stood upright and aimed its beak at one of the Protoss in front of it. Seeing that the situation was not good, the gods wanted to turn around and retreat, but it was too late. The blood pigeon spat out a silent shockwave from its beak, instantly enveloping the Protoss in front of it. Looking from the side, Yu Ting could clearly see the distortion in space caused by the shockwave. Deep down, Qingguang was also shocked. He did not expect the power of the blood pigeon's toad spit from the condor fighting art to be so shocking. "I'll kill you with a mouthful of salt soda." He still had enough air in his chest. Qingguang decisively shook his head. And so, under Yu Ting's desperate gaze, the toad spit swung in a full circle, sweeping through the 7 or 8 Protoss that were flying high and low in the air. But they did not cry out and fly backwards. Instead, they suddenly stopped in the air. Seeing the blood pigeon turn its head to face him again, the blue light that had enveloped its body gradually dissipated. Yu Ting did not look back and turned to run, dragging Vesthini along with him. If not for the fact that he could not say it, Qingguang really wanted to tell him. "Are you stupid? Do you think you're invincible just because you added a magic seal that works against birds? Can't I just stay in the air? What's the point? No one said that birds had to fly, right? Could the magic seal stop ostriches?" But Qingguang was not at ease. After Yu Ting took Vesthini away, the swamp was quickly solidifying, but the fatal attacks from the gods all fell on the ground in front of him. Yes, it was the place where he had swung his head. On the other hand, the ordinary players who were confused by the sudden turn of events, had no idea what was going on. The ordinary players looked at the gradually dissipating magic seal and wanted to ask Yu Ting, but Yu Ting did not have time to deal with them. At the same time as the explosion in front of Qin Guang sounded like a nuclear bomb, the gods that had been frozen in the air after being hit by the toad spit suddenly turned into dust and scattered. Dead. They're all dead? The ordinary players were at a loss. The explosion in front of Qin Guang continued. He had no choice but to roll up his wings and protect himself. A strong explosion came from in front of him, and the blood pigeon's huge body was blown away. But before he could fly more than 2 meters, he fell to the ground as if he had been swatted by a fly swatter. The blue light that had been gradually dispersing actually condensed on his body again. Qin Guang's wings, which had just regrown with great difficulty, were first blasted bare by the explosions before the gods' deaths. What was even more tragic was that he was smacked by the magic array's anti-flying effect, causing him to be in a daze. Qin Guang raised his head slightly, wanting to curse. I didn't fly on my own. Is it my fault that I was blown away? Just then, a figure appeared not far away from him like lightning. It was the card magician. He was holding a metal card that was half a meter long in his hand. It was a king card. Then his eyes flashed fiercely. He swung his body like a discus, and the big ghost in his hand spun and flew towards the blood pigeon's neck. This guy reacted quickly. He actually knew how to snatch the sword. Qin Guang raised his bare wings in front of his neck, a question the size of a fist in his head. To kill or not to kill? Chapter 1199. While he was thinking about this in his mind, the big ace had already sharply cut its wings. The card magician's seemingly inconspicuous move contained perhaps his strongest attack. Without the cover of feathers, the card cut a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. That wasn't the end of it. The metal ace didn't stay in his wings. Instead, it flew out and spun in the air for a while before exploding and turning into small poker cards that filled the sky. Then they flew in a big circle and returned to the card magician's hand. The magician shuffled the thick stack of cards in his hand as he retreated. Then he clapped his hands and the stack of cards turned into the big ghost that was half a meter long. At the same time he shouted, "Everyone, don't just stand there. This big pigeon is seriously injured. Let's kill it while it's still weak." As he shouted, he threw the big ghost in his hand again. Qin Guang's heart ached. That's right, he felt heartache. My heart is like the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch. I hit you hard. The old man was in such a good state that he could eat 3,000 kilograms of pigeon feed. I'm too into it. I just can't bear to kill you, but you're forcing me to do this. He wanted to chase after Yu Ting and Wethany, but on the other side, many ordinary players were convinced by the card magician's bewitching words, and surrounded him. No matter what, Qin Guang's appearance as the real blood pigeon was a little unsightly. The feathers on the front half of his body had almost all been burnt, and his standard pigeon skin was densely covered in countless wounds. Coupled with the miserable state he had been in when he suddenly fell to the ground, anyone would think that he was an arrow at the end of its flight. In addition, Yu Ting's previous action of commanding the Protoss to steal the damage contribution points caused the ordinary players to misunderstand. They really thought that the blood pigeon was about to die. Although the sudden death of more than half of the Protoss shocked everyone, wasn't this because of the blood pigeon's final struggle? In any case, they had to be enemies with it. Rather than waiting for it to catch its breath and defeat it one by one, they might as well kill it now. Therefore, after a short period of silence, the players suddenly went berserk. Dressed in miniature Gundam armor, the old man squad shone brightly as they put on their armor and charged toward Qin Guang's direction. While they were sprinting, 2 thick black tubes extended from their shoulders and shot at the blood pigeons in front of them. Countless light spots the size of ostrich eggs flew toward the blood pigeons. They did not plan to give Qin Guang any chance to breathe. The fatty and the middle school student hesitated for a moment and did not follow up immediately. This was the middle school student's idea. He had a feeling that things were not as simple as they seemed. The pigeon did not seem to be in a good situation, but its aura did not diminish much. Peasant and her 2 companions didn't move. They left the mana formation and gathered together. Why don't we go and help? If we can kill blood pigeon along the way, won't everything be over? The elven archer asked in confusion. Peasant shook his head and said, No, let's observe the situation. I feel that the gaze of the magical beast is familiar. Peasant didn't want to tell the others his conjecture because it was too unbelievable. As the saying went, the eyes were the windows to the soul. A person's appearance and clothing could be disguised, but it was difficult to change one's gaze. The situation had changed drastically, so Peasant didn't think of a possibility. As time passed, especially when the blood pigeon's eyes flashed with anger and humiliation, Peasant recalled the Chinese characters that blood pigeon had written on the ground with its claws. Peasant suddenly felt that the pigeon's gaze was similar to Mr. Dang's. Though they were of different races and it was inconceivable she had an illusion, Peasant felt that the person who gave her the illusion was another person. She felt that the blood pigeon's gaze and behavior were similar to an outsider. When that person's figure appeared in her mind, she realized that Mr. Dang was similar to that person too. With that person as a bridge, Peasant slowly connected blood pigeon and Mr. Dang together. Using her analytical mind, Peasant overlapped Mr. Dang's face and gaze with the head of blood pigeon, who was about to retaliate. The more she thought, the more suspicious she felt, but she had no evidence. She was perplexed. If Mr. Dang was the final boss of the world of bloodshed, what would happen to them? He was almost invincible and had the intelligence of a human. He was an old gamer, who had seen through the entire game system. What else could they do but wait for death? At a distance, Blood Pigeon sent the card magician's trump card flying. Then he used his wings to protect himself from the cannon fire of the old geezer's team. Behind it, the magical beast skill trio finally pounced on it. The warrior activated Bloodlust, the fireball magician cast Pyroblast, and the beast master summoned his shadow wolf. With a command, the shadow wolf transformed into a stream of light and charged forward. Qin Guang couldn't take it anymore. He understood that since they were on different sides, he would be cruel to himself if he was merciful to others. If he didn't make any changes now, he might really die here if he was worn out from exhaustion. Compared to normal gamers, he didn't have any reward points to use. All his actions had consumed his own energy. Now, compared to the beginning, his mobility had actually declined slightly. So, lad, I'm sorry. Qin Guang shook his head and used his claws to support himself on the ground. Then he strode forward. The card magician was caught off guard. He wanted to escape, but it was too late. When he was above the card magician's head, Qin Guang kicked up. In the blink of an eye, the azure light that had dissipated long ago returned to his body, and he smashed down like a cannonball, slamming into the ground. Qin Guang expressed that his experiment was a success. Unfortunately, the no pigeon under heaven array still hadn't exhausted its energy. The principle behind it was also simple. He had to maintain a certain part of his body in contact with the ground, or it would trigger the flight restriction. This brought him a lot of inconvenience, but it also had its benefits. Propping himself up from the ground, Qin Guang shook his head again and ran to another person who was very close to him. Everyone retreat. The boss has entered a chaotic attack state. The electrical appliance fatty shouted with a loudspeaker. Qin Guang ignored him. In order to make himself more ruthless, Qin Guang completely hypnotized himself to forget his human identity. He really turned himself into a phantom boss in a killing mission. For a moment he was full of murderous intent and pursued efficiency. He only wanted to reduce the enemy's life force as quickly as possible. He killed the shadow wolf in front of him with a casual claw. His second choice was the magical beast warrior closest to him. The magical beast warrior used a cover skill and dashed to his teammates at the speed of charge. But the blood pigeon suddenly opened its beak, and a sound wave came from behind, messing up the warrior's escape route. He couldn't control himself and turned back to the blood pigeon. Only when he was close to the blood pigeon did he barely regain control of his body and try to raise his shield. The blood pigeon lowered its head and pecked down like a chick pecking at rice. The giant beak rammed into the spiked rampart of Azeroth. There was a loud noise. The beak flashed red and the door-sized steel shield cracked. The magical beast warrior screamed, his eyes wide with anger. The beak pierced through his chest, and his body gradually turned into dust. Another player died. At that moment, Qin Guang did not notice that the god's divine power that he had filtered and then dispersed from his but had quietly gathered together again. Yu Ting, who had escaped far away, had a fierce glint in his eyes. He made a difficult decision. In the depths of Yu Ting's mind, the unwilling cries of nearly 50 Protoss players rang out. Lord Yu Ting. No. No. Yu Ting, are you crazy? What are you doing? Yu Ting. I won't let you go when we return to the divine realm. It turned out that the seemingly dead Protoss still had their divine souls in this mission space, even though their projected bodies had collapsed. Once the mission was over, these divine souls would return to their real bodies. But now Yu Ting was using the power given to him by the origin of the divine realm to control the scattered divine souls of the Protoss, and then gather all of their divine power together. His goal was simple. He would gather the divine power of the gods together and then detonate it. Under normal circumstances, Qin Guang would definitely be able to detect Yu Ting's sneaky trick. But right now, in order to kill the human players without any qualms, he had hypnotized himself a little too much. After pecking the warrior to death, Qin Guang pounced on the magician. The magician first used flash and teleported, but Qin Guang chased after him. The magician's flash skill was still on cooldown. Helplessly, he raised his hands high, and with his position as the center, his body was instantly frozen by a glowing layer of ice. This was the ice block that mages used to protect themselves in World of Warcraft. It could temporarily enter a state of invincibility. But this was meaningless. Facing this ice block, Qin Guang first took a deep breath and then continued to breathe at it. Once the ice block skill's duration was up, it would naturally dissipate, and the magician would immediately turn into dust. Qin Guang's eyes were bloodshot. He turned around and pounced on one of the Gundams from Oldman's team. This mini Gundams that had transformed into a motorcycle turned around and tried to run, but a long feather suddenly flew over and stuck its tire, nailing it to the ground. Qin Guang rushed over, and when he got close, the mini Gundam suddenly opened up, and a panic-looking brawny man jumped out of it. As he ran, another long feather flew out, but it hit the force field shield activated by the battle robe on the muscular man's body. The long feather shattered, but it didn't vanish. Instead, it transformed into crimson blood that coiled tightly around the force field shield. The blood pigeon screeched, lifted its leg and stomped down viciously. The force field shield cracked. This creature is going berserk. The fat electrical appliance specialist said in a panic. The genius high school student's heart raced. This creature is too powerful. We're no match for it. Sister Peasant, we can't hesitate anymore. Otherwise everyone will die. Peasant's companions urged anxiously. Peasant pursed her lips tightly. At this moment, only she could see the indignation and pain in the mythical beast's eyes. Peasant wasn't wrong. At this moment, Qin Guang had already completed his self-hypnosis. However, his true self was still awake and independent in the depths of his heart. He discovered that as he truly began to slaughter the human race, his standpoint and position in the depths of his heart were inevitably shifting. All along, no matter how high his status was, or how he had the power to decide the life and death of the commoners, he didn't change his attitude. At the very most, he only regarded himself as a powerful and wealthy mortal. But now, there was an uncontrollable feeling in his heart. Perhaps he was wrong from the start. He wasn't a creature of the same level as the humans. He was like a child who was fed by wolves and had to return to human society sooner or later. In the process of killing, he awakened the instincts of a high-level creature that viewed life as grass and mortals as ants. Would he become like Yu Ting and the other Protoss? What could he do? Stop killing and wait for death with his eyes closed? Accept the consequences of failing the mission with a ridiculous reason and then be killed by the heavenly Holy Grail? So, the fundamental purpose of this world of slaughter is to let me completely break away from the state of mind of a mortal? Did he have to pay such a heavy price to upgrade the heavenly Holy Grail from the second level of One-Line Sky to the third level of Cloud Elephant Sky? Qin Guang couldn't help but recall bits and pieces of his memories. He remembered his parents' voices and smiles. He remembered his childhood friends and buddies from his hometown. He remembered his classmates who fought with him in junior high school. He remembered his best buddies in Gokyo University. His subordinates in Qingguang Group, the world that he was determined to change, and the women that he couldn't bear to part with. What should he do? He had never faced such a dilemma. Either he would die, or from now on he would no longer be himself. As he watched his body pounce towards another miniature Gundam, he used his completely calm self to think that perhaps this was the true meaning of the slaughtering world. Chapter 1200. Just as his mind was in chaos, a formless and terrifying force quietly approached his huge body. It was the power of the god race that Yu Ting had gathered again. But Yu Ting was not in a hurry to detonate it. Instead, he let the power that was mixed with his divine power and soul stick closely to the back of the blood pigeon, and then continuously seeped in like water. As for Qin Guang, even though his mind had long been tortured by the dilemma, his body continued to chase and kill the players around him with the instinct of the blood pigeon's phantom beast. It was said that after an actor got into character, there might be a situation where he couldn't get out of character. In the past, this kind of thing would never happen to Qin Guang, who was the world's best actor. But this time he found himself in an extremely awkward situation. His mind was extremely clear, but he couldn't control his body at all. The blood pigeon's huge body might be acting according to the instinct of a real phantom beast, or it might be driven by the second personality that he had used his acting skills to hypnotize himself. What made him feel the most helpless was that he was extremely calm and clearly watching everything that was happening, but he couldn't stop it. In other words, he didn't know what choice he should make at this time. Should he go against the self-restraint that he had all along and choose to walk the path of becoming a god? Or should he forcefully take back the control of his body, let these mortals go, and then accept the outcome of the mission failure so that he, the master of the Holy Grail, could personally feel the mystery of the so-called reset? Perhaps self-sacrifice could make him look great, but he was unwilling. Besides, there were too many changes in the mission of the Realm and Cup this time, so he couldn't help but worry about everything in the outside world. Perhaps the real world had completely invaded? Then, his reality might no longer be the reality of the past? As the initiator of everything, as the only person in the world and perhaps the entire universe who knew the truth of the heavenly Holy Grail, and as the only person who could control the power of the Holy Grail, if he died easily, what kind of change would it bring? Would it be the end of the world, the end of the universe? Qin Guang asked himself, sometimes I'm great, but sometimes I might be selfish. If he really lost everything, even if the earth was destroyed, he couldn't do anything about it. But he always wanted to protect the people that he really cared about. If he were to die in the world in the cup now, then the countless dreams he had made in the past would all be for naught. Parents, friends and relatives, and everyone who was related to him or not, might turn into nothingness in this completely changed world, becoming something that had never existed in the first place. So what am I supposed to do? Otherwise we'll miss our last chance. The female elf archer who was beside Peasant said. Peasant gritted her teeth and said, wait a moment, I think Blood Pigeon is Mr. Dang. She finally voiced her conjecture. How is that possible? The other girl found it hard to believe. Peasant said, in Mission 8 Mr. Dang didn't complete the mission but he didn't die. I suspect he triggered a special event and became a boss. Didn't Blood Pigeon write on the ground? That's a trap. The mythical beast boss is trying to make us lower our guard. No matter what, he has started killing the human gamers and we have no choice. Even if he's Mr. Dang, what's the use? We are on opposing sides. If we don't kill him we will die. The other girl said agitatedly. Facing Blood Pigeon, who was suddenly injured, everyone knew that this might be their last chance. Peasant trembled. She knew that her companion was right. Make a decision. We don't have time to hesitate, the elf archer said. The elven archer said again. Finally, Peasant nodded and gritted his teeth as he said, all right, all right. In the blink of an eye, the elf archer aimed at the Blood Pigeon. Peasant held the hourglass in his right hand and placed his left hand on his longbow. On the other side, the fat household appliance man and the middle school student, who had been running away in panic, turned around. They put on their equipment again and charged at the struggling Blood Pigeon with no regard for their lives. Although their equipment looked comical, their power was quite extraordinary. The production line robot that the fat man was sitting on was more than 10 meters tall. It could produce the metal waste at an average speed of 1 microwave oven every 5 seconds, and then use the high-speed conveyor belt on its shoulder to throw it out, just like a battering ram in a movie. As for the young prodigy, although he was wearing a strange armor, he did not fully utilize the awakened ability of the fat household appliance. Instead, he strangely tossed out grayish-black energy balls from the cockpit from time to time. The balls wobbled as they floated towards Blood Pigeon's head. Then they would hit Blood Pigeon's body like water bubbles, but there was nothing strange about it. The greatest threat to Qin Guang was the elf archer's magic arrows, which were enhanced by Peasant's time effect. Every arrow hit the vital parts of the Blood Pigeon's body. It was either the eyes, the neck, or the slightly opened beak of the Blood Pigeon. It was commonly referred to as the deep throat. Qin Guang, who had been in the Jianghu for tens of thousands of years, had never been in such dire straits. This sort of feeling was perhaps even more painful than the feeling of true death in the sea of momentary. At the very least, he would be able to die once and for all, and he would also know how many times he could revive after he died. It was a little painful, but he wasn't worried. Now he was worried because he didn't know if he could revive. In addition, he felt terrible in his heart as well. On one hand, he was questioning himself. On the other hand, he was suffering from the corrosive poison that was destroying his body. On the other hand, the human that he wanted to protect was trying to kill him. At this moment, his spirit was gradually shaken. His original self, which had left his physical body, was slowly returning to his physical body and was showing signs of reuniting with Blood Pigeon's consciousness, which was controlling his physical body. But he couldn't do that. If his consciousness were to reunite with his physical body, what awaited him would probably be rage to the point where he would completely lose his rationality. He finally found out why his consciousness was detached from his body. It was the after effect of using the meditation technique in the labyrinth of chaos. The after effect was about to dissipate because of his emotions. The elf archer's magic arrow pierced his throat and penetrated downwards. The arrow transformed into pure destructive energy that destroyed the blood pigeon's chest. Intense pain came again. The blood pigeon turned around angrily, flapped its wings and roared. But just as it was about to pounce, there was a loud noise behind it. Blood spurted out like a fountain. This time the blood pigeon's entire back was gone. Countless feathers scattered in all directions, along with shattered flesh, bones and exploding blood. When the bystanders looked over, they only felt that this huge blood pigeon had turned into a huge flower of blood that had suddenly bloomed. This explosion sent the blood pigeon flying forward again. Her feet left the ground by accident, and she was immediately suppressed by the last remaining force of the magic array. The flower of blood was flattened as if it had been smashed by a spatula. The blood pigeon's huge body trembled, but it didn't move anymore. Is it dead? The fat man tried to throw a microwave at the pigeon, and even smashed it into its body, which was still gushing with blood. Chen Guang's second personality in the blood pigeon's body collapsed under the sudden burst of pain. His real self was being pulled by an unknown force, trying to get back into the blood pigeon's body. Even Chen Guang felt sad when he saw the blood pigeon's miserable condition. He tried to resist it. On the one hand, he tried to form a new consciousness in the blood pigeon's body, and on the other hand he tried to use a method to calm his own consciousness. But it was all in vain. Although it was a mental method, it still needed the cooperation of the three aspects of essence, chi and spirit. His bird body couldn't use complicated human martial arts at all, not to mention that he was seriously injured. While tearing at the blood pigeon's body, he resisted at the same time. The struggle of consciousness made his mind fall into another extremely mysterious realm. His soul was suddenly separated from the blood pigeon's body, and he could even look down at himself. He was still alive, but his soul had left his body. But the body that left his body was not his real body. Besides, he existed in this world of cups as a spiritual body. Even if he had a physical body, it should be a fake body created by the energy of the world of cups. No matter how real the feeling was, as the master of the Holy Grail, the experiencer of the world of cups, and the real sufferer of the test, he had a clear understanding of it. He knew in his heart that this body of his was fake. But now, even his fake body had been inexplicably stripped away. Chen Guang's mind stopped at the same place. Looking at the blood pigeon's miserable condition, he felt like he was flying freely in this world of cups after being separated from his body. He wanted to stay awake, but he couldn't control the strong feeling of separation and the endless expansion of the tentacles of his mind. Everything in the Colosseum seemed to be touched by the tentacles of his mind. Not only that, his consciousness kept spreading to the sky above his head. At this moment he felt like he had become one with the Colosseum of the slaughtering world, but at the same time his soul was being pulled into the blood pigeon's body. It was a painful torment, but it was also an unparalleled pleasure. He seemed to be gradually turning from a mortal to an omnipotent and omniscient god, but on the other hand he was a heavily injured pigeon struggling on the ground, unwilling to die. His illusory body was dying, but his real soul was expanding infinitely. The threads of his mind, like the tentacles of a jellyfish, spread upward over the 1-kilometer diameter Colosseum, and kept going up and up. With the mosaic audience in front of him, Chen Guang originally thought that the blue sky and white clouds above the Colosseum were just high-quality pictures. But when his mind really began to spread upward, he found something strange. There was no picture of the dome, and the sky might be real. But there was no limit to the upward extension of his mind, and his left and right were still trapped in the 1-kilometer diameter of the cylinder. His mind kept spreading upward at a speed that completely surpassed the speed of light, trying to touch the blue sky and white clouds. This was not his active behavior, but he couldn't control his mind at all, just like water that couldn't control itself from spreading in a sponge. The threads of his mind were different from the spiritual force, but the thoughts of his soul body seemed to be merging with the whole world in the cup. But this world in the cup was very strange. The surface space was only 1 kilometer, but the vertical space was endless. Suddenly there was a pop sound. Chen Guang's mind seemed to break through something. Then he saw a completely dumbfounded scene. He saw himself. Not the bald guy in the world in the cup but the real him. The himself was holding the steering wheel with both hands, looking straight ahead with a pained expression. This was the himself, who was driving to the airport outside. Where the hell am I now? Chen Guang's mind slightly looked down, and saw the supreme holy grail on the cup holder of the car. Holy sh*T. It means my mind rushed out of the cup. What the hell is this situation? Looking at the himself, in front of him, Chen Guang's mind was in a mess. Wait a minute, is this all of my consciousness or part of my consciousness that came out? Most of my thoughts are in the world in the cup and the part of my thoughts that came out now. Wait, a person's thoughts should be a complete individual, so the current me should still be the complete me. But half of it is in the cup, and the other half is outside looking at me ? Yoli? Chen Guang tried to call Yoli in his mind, but still no one paid attention to him. He looked outside the car again. The car that should be speeding on the highway at 120 kilometers per hour was completely still. He simply floated out of the car and looked around. In front of him was a world that had come to a complete standstill. The sun hung high in the sky, its light soft. The wheels that should have been spinning at high speed were completely still. The white smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe dragged a long line behind the car, and the further it went, the lighter it became. He could even see the flame in the internal combustion engine that was frozen. The leaf that flew over from the side of the highway quietly hung in the air, about 7 or 8 meters in front of his car. Chen Guang walked over and stretched out his finger to try to touch the leaf, but he touched nothing. Wait, I don't have fingers at all. Chen Guang suddenly realized that he was just an existence made up of thoughts. Compared to the rules of the outside universe, he should be something that didn't exist at all. Also, why is my thought no longer spreading? Maybe in the rules of the outside universe, the diffusion of my thought is suppressed. With a thought, Chen Guang flew up. He floated in the air and looked at the bird that was flying forward with its wings spread, but it was also completely still. Thinking about the flow of time in the outside world when he was in the world in the cup, he was sure of his guess. When he was in the cup, the flow of time in the outside world was indeed changed. Maybe it wasn't completely still, but at least it was slowed down countless times. This shouldn't be something that he could see and feel, but because of the mutation of the slaughter world this time, it was completely presented to him in such an incredible way. Now that I'm out, what's the situation in the cup? With a thought, his thought returned to the cup. He could still see the body of the blood pigeon lying on the ground, and the blood and flesh splattering in the air. The drops of bright red blood were also suspended in the air. The time in the world in the cup was also confused. His thought was in 2 different planes at the same time, so compared to his thought, the 2 worlds had become a static existence. Is this possible? After complaining, Chen Guang let out a long breath, and inexplicably relaxed. The sense of urgency that had never weakened since entering the world of slaughter suddenly disappeared from his body. You may not believe it, but I feel like I pressed the pause button when fighting a boss. Since time has stopped, I can finally catch my breath and rest for a bit. He found that he really didn't need to worry. He had endless time to think about how to deal with the situation in front of him because the concept of time had disappeared. At this moment in the slaughter world, Peasant didn't know that the sand in the hourglass in her right hand was falling. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.